Hi, thanks, Scott.
Okay, thank you. Well, welcome back, everybody. Mr. Whittle, you're going to be coordinating the council's witnesses.
Mr. Fisher is.
Mr. Fisher is going to be coordinating. Okay, so we're happy for you to call them in any order you wish proceed with, and I assume they'll come up to the front here.
Yes,
we've got slightly damaged musical chairs.
That's right. We've got the first three here already. We're going to call them in the order that they were listed at the front of the submissions. And as you noted earlier, each witness has prepared a summary of the evidence, and in some cases it also includes an overview of responses to the rebuttal evidence filed by KFO. So we're going to talk through that as well and answer any questions on it. And our first witness is Mr. Rubin, who was involved in the spatial plan. So he's going to talk to you about that process and we'll go from there. So over to you, Mr. Rubin.
Good morning, Mr. Rubin.
My name is Esmond Rubin. I am a senior strategic planner at Parliament District Council, and I was the project lead for the Kerikeri-Waipapa spatial plan. I prepared a statement of evidence in relation to the rezoning request by Kiwi Fresh Orange Company, which I will refer to as KFO, in the Kerikeri-Waipapa area under the proposed district plan. I will not read the entirety of my summary in the interest of time. I will go through the 3 points only, and the order of my points may change. I will provide a brief summary and an initial response to the rebuttal evidence of KFO, noting that a full right of reply will be provided by the Section 218 following the hearing. To start off, the purpose of the spatial plan. The spatial plan is a council-adopted document that sets out the strategic direction for urban growth within the Kerikeri-Waipapa over a 30-year period, identifying preferred areas for residential, commercial, and industrial development. And this is alongside the infrastructure required to support this growth. The spatial plan was developed in accordance with good practice for future development strategy and aligns with the principles of the National Policy Statement on Urban Development, despite the council not being a Tier 1 or 2 local authority. Our approach to growth planning and the process for developing the spatial plan is covered in more detail in my original statement. In summary, there were 8 phases in total. 6 growth scenarios were developed in Phase 4, with public engagement on these in Phase 5. Growth scenarios A to F were developed and assessed through a multi-criteria analysis, incorporating technical, cultural, environmental, and community considerations. A hybrid scenario combining scenarios D and E, focusing growth in Kerikeri South and Waipapa, was selected as the preferred growth strategy. This approach supports infrastructure efficiency, aligns with community aspirations, and promotes a well-functioning urban environment. The land subject to KFO's submission was included as Scenario F. Scenario F performed poorly across multiple evaluation criteria. It ranked second to last in the public engagement result. It ranked lowest in the Hapuropu cultural analysis, and it scored lower in the subject matter expert MCA for reasons outlined in my original statement. As a result of the growth scenarios evaluation, Scenario F was not included in the draft spatial plan. In the consultation phase on the draft spatial plan, the inclusion of Scenario F emerged as a strong theme from submissions, particularly among those who did not support the draft spatial plan. In response to these submissions, the project team, with the support of subject matter experts, re-evaluated the feasibility of integrating the unconstrained portions of Scenario F into the spatial plan, whether partially or fully. After completing this assessment, the project team concluded that Scenario F does not represent the most suitable outcome for the long-term urban growth of Kerikeri and Waipapa, either in part or in full. This is set out in more detail within the deliberations report provided in Appendix 1 of my original statement. The Council formally adopted the spatial plan based on the hybrid growth scenario. However, since a significant number of public submissions supported Scenario F, the Council has acknowledged that support by including Scenario F in the final plan as a contingent future growth area subject to certain conditions. Council's resolution specified that Scenario F is not part of the 30-year growth plan and it is not incorporated into infrastructure planning or costing within the adopted plan. Ms. O'Connor's planning evidence on behalf of KFO suggests conditions set out in the spatial plan for identifying Scenario F as a contingent future growth area have either been met or can be secured through the proposed precinct included in the rezoning submission. However, for the reasons outlined in my statement of evidence regarding the evaluation of Scenario F, whether these conditions can be met required careful assessment, and at this stage, there is insufficient information to provide certainty that the conditions can be met. At this stage, I consider the conditions outlined for the contingent future growth area have not been met. Any consideration of whether Scenario F should be activated for future growth is more appropriately addressed through a future review of the spatial plan prior to any rezoning of the land in the PDP. The medium density residential and town centre zones recommended in the Section 52A report closely align with the directions set by the spatial plan, particularly with the principles of achieving a compact and efficient urban form. Both zones will work synergistically to support the growth of Kerikeri's urban environment and strengthen commercial activity, while also enabling the development of more affordable housing within surrounding walkable catchments. Now I will respond to the matters raised in the KFO rebuttal evidence, and in particular, the rebuttal evidence of Ms. O'Connor. I make the following further comments. Ms. O'Connor's rebuttal statement that the PDP should include 70% of growth in greenfield areas as suggested by the spatial plan does not reflect the intent of the spatial plan, which anticipates a phased approach to plan changes and infrastructure delivery rather than immediate zoning of all capacity. I do not agree that the full greenfield allocation should be provided immediately by the PDP, especially noting the evidence of Mr. Kelrath that there is sufficient development capacity across the entire district and in Kerikeri-Waipapa, with a deficit position remaining under the PDPR only for detached dwellings over the long term in Kerikeri-Waipapa. In other words, the deficit only occurs beyond the life the PDP. From a spatial plan perspective, Ms. O'Connor's statement that further consultation on the inclusion of Scenario F in the PDP is unnecessary does not align with the Council's resolution from the 18th of June 2005 meeting. The resolution specifies that adding Scenario F as a contingent future growth area does not change the adopted scenario or infrastructure planning, and its formal inclusion will require additional consultation or plan review. While the Council acknowledged the public interest in Scenario F, it has not endorsed it and it has indicated that further consultation is necessary. Due to the uncertainty regarding Scenario F's ability to satisfy the conditions outlined in the Council resolution, it is my opinion that the scenario should be considered through a future planning process if supported by a review of the spatial plan. Ms. O'Connor's statement that the Council's approach to providing Hapuropu with information was misleading is not accurate. In the briefing pack provided to the Hapuropu regarding Scenario F, the project team included technical information relating to the servicing strategy and indicative roading layout. This material was reflected in the assessment of Scenario F, which formed part of the cultural impact addendum released during the growth scenarios engagement. Given the volume of documentation associated with the KFO submission, the project team presented a summary of relevant information in a neutral and accessible format. As all KFO submission documents are publicly available, the suggestion that information was withheld is unfounded. To conclude, I support recommendations to rezone land where the outcome achieved in the submission aligns with the strategic direction set out in the spatial plan. This includes support for the town centre zone and the medium density residential zones. This reflects a compact, infrastructure-efficient approach which is promoted in the spatial plan. I do not support the rezoning of scenario F for urban development at this time. In my opinion, rezoning the land under the PDP would be inconsistent with the adopted spatial plan and undermines the council's ability to deliver coordinated infrastructure-supported growth in the right locations. This could result in less efficient outcomes and compromise the integration of land use and infrastructure planning. Any consideration of rezoning scenario F for urban development should be addressed through a future planning process, if supported by a review of the spatial plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ruben. We'll see if the commissioners have any questions for you.
Thanks, Mr. Ruben. So you mentioned a future review of the spatial plan. What's the anticipated timing of that from the council's perspective? Is it like 5 years away, 10 years away?
We haven't documented a specific time to review the spatial plan under the implementation plan strategy, but I think it might be appropriate to do it when the HPA is reviewed or a key piece of technical evidence is updated. It's a living document, so we have to adapt.
Yeah. I mean, it's only just been finished, so it's hard to think about when the next review might happen, but yeah, that's useful.
I guess future development strategy review times aligning with those.
Okay.
Do you have any further questions for Mr. Ruben?
I didn't form a view as part of the spatial plan in reviewing it. I had a number of questions at that time. I guess in terms of looking at where the growth can go is a key consideration. I think I had similar questions about the review of the spatial plan and the time frames, because it's a similar question I have, and I'm not sure if it's for legal or for yourself in terms of what we don't know about the future legislation and the timeframes around how far out we are to plan and the amount of greenfields land we're to plan for in terms of that central government direction that is not yet directed to us from central government. And I'm not sure if either legal or yourself have a response to that, because we haven't been given that direction from central government as yet.
Yeah, it's, at this point it's probably speculative. We don't have certainty on that. We haven't seen the bill yet. We don't know where it's heading. And really until it's passed as law, we can't really factor into the decision-making process. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your summary of your. I think we can now move on to your next witness, Mr.
Thank you. Next up is Mr. Mickelrath, economic expert, who has also prepared a summary, which he's extended.
Yep. Yes, I'm Lawrence Macroth from Market Economics. The summary statement, I will read through it. There are one or two good points that I'll shorten down, but I will take you with me. So just 1.2, the purpose of the statement is to provide a brief summary of my evidence and to provide an initial response to the budget evidence of KFO. It's limited, it's KFO, noting that the full budget reply will be provided under section 4280, including additional expert input as required following the hearing. 2.1, my evidence covers three aspects: demand, supply, and sufficiency position of the enabled capacity. My evidence is based on a comprehensive and robust analysis that is consistent with the requirements of the National Policy Statement on Urban Development. I also comment on relevant submissions. The Housing and Business Capacity Assessment, HPA, and supporting which you identified two key points about the Kerikeri-Waipapa residential landscape. The first one, housing affordability is a key challenge. This is because of the combined effects of high development cost and low household income levels. So it's about development costs, super expensive, very expensive, and affordability of household some other development options. In terms of capacity, there is significant planning over capacity. That is the theoretical capacity. However, there is a mismatch between the type of capacity that is commercially feasible and the demand that is expected. I assessed the change in capacity that would be enabled by the proposed district plan recommended version to PDPR, and I've also considered the potential role of the spatial plan. So 2.4 in terms of demand outlook. The demand for housing or of housing is dynamic and is influenced by many factors such as population growth, population aging, housing preferences, and how households make trade-offs about typologies, budgets, and locations. Over the long term, the change in household numbers is estimated at 3,260 in Kerikeri-Waipapa and 7,255 across the entire district. This change is the starting point for estimating how much capacity will be needed in the future. So in 2.6, I talked about the Tier 1, Tier 2 situation that we discussed. Now, a key thing here is Tier 3 councils aren't required to provide a competitiveness margin. So essentially, competitiveness margin is providing an addition to, in terms of demand, so 20% over the sort of first 10 years and 15% additional over the next sort of next 20, so a total of 30 from year 10 to year 30. So essentially what that means is we're providing more, or when we do the sufficiency assessment, we actually provide more capacity to make sure that we actually not constraining the market. So in 2.7, I also modeled the anticipated breakdown of demand in terms of typology, that is detached and detached dwelling. Historically, demand for attached and detached dwelling has been around 10% for attached dwellings and 90% for that should be detached dwellings. So that split is 10-90. This share is expected to slowly shift towards attached dwellings as households and the markets respond to factors such as affordability and the aging population. So in terms of supply, 2.8, I estimated the supply situation using the same processing model as that underpinning the Far North HPA. This model is consistent with that used by other councils throughout New Zealand. The process considers different, and then I'll list them. So that's pathways, so that's redevelopment, infill, vacant sites. Redevelopment is you take an existing site, period, you demolish what's there, you develop it up to its maximum capacity. Infill is you develop the backyard. We consider typologies, that's detached and attached dwellings and different time frames. 3 years, subsequent 7 years, and then the 20 years after that. So they're covering 30 years in total. The analysis sequence covers 3 main parts, starting off by planning over capacity. This estimates the theoretical maximum as enabled by the planning provisions. Next, we do commercially feasible capacity. This capacity is based on financial modelling of development opportunities, the development cost, likely sales prices, and the potential to generate a suitable return for the developer. And then the third part is the potential development capacity, PDC. PDC considers the likelihood that feasible capacity will be delivered by the market. This is based on price points, typology, housing preferences, and the anticipated demand. Neither planning over capacity nor feasible capacity are guaranteed. Feasible capacity does not imply that the developer will build all commercially feasible opportunities. Over the long term, the estimated potential development capacity, and that's under the PDPR, is estimated as follows, and I'll list those numbers there. Just the key numbers, Kerikeri-Waipapa total of just over 5,000, total district in a feasible capacity, potentially development capacity of 23,275 dwellings. So in terms of sufficiency and other matters, the PDC is compared against demand over the short, medium and long terms to identify the sufficiency situation. The sufficiency position is estimated with the NPS-UD competitiveness margins included. The analysis shows that there is sufficient capacity across the entire district and Kerikeri-Waipapa with a deficit remaining under the PDPR only for detached dwellings over the long term in Kerikeri-Waipapa. So that's over the 30-year time frame. However, in accordance with the NPS-UD, the long-term estimates of sufficiency sufficient development capacity include land identified for future urban use or intensification in local authority growth plans or strategies. The deficit above is reversed if the spatial plan is also considered. That is, there is sufficient capacity across all timeframes, typologies, and locations. The spatial plan is relevant to assessing capacity under clause 3.5c of the EPSUD. The PDPR enables a significant uplift in capacity that supports housing choice by enabling more capacity across detached and attached typologies. So 3.2 times more detached dwellings and 2.4 times more attached dwellings compared to the ODP. And that point is important because it facilitates competition in the market, it supports the real estate market and by providing choice. And then there's a second point, the PDPR lowers the price point of feasible capacity between -5 to -9% lower than under the ODP for detached dwellings and between 17 and 25% lower for attached dwellings. So responses to matters raised by submitters, starting with Mr. Thompson's evidence in support of the KFI submission and his rebuttal evidence. Mr. Thompson submitted evidence in support of the KFI submission. There are many and significant differences between us. These differences start with the scale of the anticipated population growth and carry across the assessment. I have significant reservations about Mr. Thompson's analysis, especially its conceptual and methodological robustness. I do not go over these details in the summary, but I consider the critical flaws of Mr. Thompson's analysis are. It uses very high population growth projections, which are, in my view, unrealistic. In his case studies, Mr. Thompson appears to equate correlation with causation. He does not isolate the net additional effect of developments. Mr. Thompson does not apply any cost variation across the options and uses a single dollar value for the development cost. He uses $150,000 per lot. This approach is despite reporting varying infrastructure costs in his evaluation of the different options. His approach does not capture any nuances or differences between the options. His approach misstates total development cost, and this issue impacts his sales price estimates. There are conceptual issues in the way Mr. Thompson designed and scored his multi-criteria assessment structure. In my view, the scoring is skewed. Two of the three tests under the national policy study for the highly productive land, BS HL, are not satisfied. With reference to Mr. Thompson's rebuttal evidence, the material differences in approaches remain. Apart from some agreement on about general theoretical matters, there is little common ground. Several parts of my analysis are mischaracterized and important. I do not list all the instances here, but the crucial points are A, Mr. Thompson incorrectly states that I did not analyze the distribution of capacity across the price band. While it is true that Mr. Thompson requested a detailed breakdown from me, I responded that I would not prepare the summary table he requested. Mr. Thompson reports this as did not analyze this part. He makes this assertion in several places. Further, Mr. Thompson states that, and that's referring to me, he has confirmed he has not completed this analysis. This is untrue. The price points that is used in the analysis is reported as 1.28 million. Mr. Thompson fails to report that this is the weighted average across all feasible development options. The fact that Mr. Thompson reports details about the price point distribution as per my evidence, but he ignores this information in his analysis. Mr. Thompson states that my analysis relies entirely on terraced houses and apartments to meet future housing needs of the typical households. This is entirely inaccurate. My analysis captures historic patterns and trends towards detached dwellings and preference for this typology. I also consider relevant price bands. Mr. Thompson characterizes section 7 in my evidence as a review of the KFO site. In that section, I review Mr. Thompson's evidence and his views about the KFO site. Mr. Thompson indicates that my analysis is based on quantity of detached dwellings supplied only, and that I do not consider the price of houses that are commodity. This is incorrect. My analysis considers price bands typology, that's attached and detached, developers' margins, as well as the probability to estimate capacity. Mr. Thompson suggested that parameters are used to estimate opportunity cost of foregone agricultural activity is the market value of land and not the annual production by values. However, I used the parameters quoted by Mr. Thompson. He references it as average rural value add, and he indicates that the parameters is based on production. If this is not the case, then Mr. Thompson's score of the different options in his MCA is based on inaccurate information. In my view, the economic activity or value is ongoing. It's not a single one-off loss. So that value continues every year into the future. It is therefore appropriate to consider the value over time and then discount it to present terms as I have done. There are other methodological issues and data errors in Mr. Thompson's analysis. Again, I only highlight key issues and I do not list all the issues. Mr. Thompson's case studies, he suggests that counterfactual is the period before greenfield developments occurred. Counterfactual is used to ensure that the analysis captures opportunity costs, displacement, as well as any other change to isolate additionality. The additionality aspect is fundamental to economic analysis. It seems that Mr. Thompson is equating a before and after situation to a with versus a without situation. That is, he does not show the additionality in a way that isolates what would have happened regardless of the change. Using regional migration patterns to illustrate the potential for lifestyle developments at a town level is inappropriate. For example, Mr. Thompson uses Otago level as regional data and said that says there is more inward migration to Northland than to Otago. Otago includes Queensland Lakes and locations such as Domaru, Dunedin, and central Otago district. By including these smaller locations in the comparison, aggregation bias is introduced. It is inappropriate to draw on regional migration data as evidence of lifestyle towns attracting internal migration. Mr. Thompson's approach to estimate the sales prices is based on land value, which is reported as accounting for 40% of the end price. That process is not robust. The source of this ratio is unknown and the results are problematic. While I understand Mr. Thompson's explanation that is in his rebuttal, it does not address the triangulation issues or the residual effect that I pointed out in my statement. The resulting construction cost ratios that's derived from Mr. Thompson's data cost vary between $2,225 per square metre to $5,050 per square metre. According to Mr. Thompson, this difference is entirely due to the cost of the land. Mr. Thompson's approach does not deliver results that can be triangulated. The cost per square metre cost, the dollar per square metre cost, that is inconsistent and does not align with observed construction rates. With reference to the MFE Ministry for the Environment report that outlines the cost difference between intensification infill and greenfield options, Mr. Thompson indicates that he does not agree with the report by 3WC Sense Partners and he labels it as unreliable. He indicates that the values are explicitly overstated. This is incorrect. The report forecasts future costs and uses official price inflators from FNDC to reflect those future values. This is best practice and appropriate. I note that work by several other entities, such as the Productivity Commission, Centre for International Economics, and the OECD, all returned similar findings. I remain of the view that Mr. Thompson's analysis is flawed with conceptual and methodological issues. In terms of Mr. Heath's evidence in support of Ken Lewis' limited submission and his rebuttal, Mr. Heath provided a statement in support of Ken Lewis' limited submission. I agree with large parts of Mr. Heath's assessment. In my view, the main issue is the scale of relief sought and the potential risks associated with the scale. The risks are due to the size of the enabled capacity relative to the anticipated demand. The risks are related to land banking type behavior. Anticipated demand is for around 210 dwellings, and the relief would enable circa 500 dwellings. This is more than double the anticipated growth. One way to mitigate the risk is to restrict the size of the change, focusing on short and medium-term growth and providing for a share of that growth would require land of circa 11 hectares for 18% of the site. With reference to Mr. Keith's proposal, I again see broad agreement at a conceptual level. However, we differ in terms of the degree to which risks remain. Mr. Heath's position is that the constraints in the loan may mean that the risks fall away entirely. I do not share this position. The size of the enabled capacity relative to the anticipated growth means that those risks cannot be entirely discounted. In my view, the trade-off is between enabling additional development that could accommodate all future growth and accepting a risk that there might be a dilution of intensification benefits. This trade-off must be considered in the local context, that is, a small local economy with a narrow employment base with relatively lower household incomes. In terms of Mr. Foy's evidence in support of Mr. Campbell-Freer, Mr. Foy provides evidence in support of Mr. Campbell-Freer's submission and covers 3 locations: the Cakehouse node, the Redwood node, and an area of land with the reduced being rural residential zone. In my view, the key matters relating to the business locations is to consider are related to location and the relative performance of the locations vis-a-vis the same sector in the Kerikeri-Waipapa market. In terms of employment, the Redwoods location has been declining and losing market share relative to the wider Kerikeri-Waipapa market. For the Cakehouse location, employment levels have trended up, but the growth has been in line with market trends. In my view, the location of Redwoods and Cakehouse nodes relative to the demand and the Kerikeri-Waipapa business area undermine the ability to contribute meaningfully to urban efficiency. I consider that enabling additional growth in these locations are likely to dilute activity away from Kerikeri and Waipapa, generating adverse economic effects. In terms of rebuttal evidence, Mr. Ford presents additional information in response to the points raised in the statement of evidence. He covers employment growth using a longer time frame and interprets the patterns. At a high level, Mr. Foy's data aligns with my data, especially the Redwoods location using SO1 data has been declining in employment and percentage terms, and that's percentage relative to Kerikeri-Waipapa. And the Cakehouse location's share of the employment has remained relatively range-bound, around 4% over the past decade or so, with a jump more recently to around 4.5%. The share of employment shows some volatility over the past 2 decades, falling as low as 1.5% before the global financial crisis. In my view, the observation that the relative share has remained relatively stable means that the location is not growing faster than the benchmark. That's Kerikeri-Waipapa. I do, however, acknowledge the volatility and recent upward changes. Mr. Ford relies on the change in employment numbers, so that's the absolute numbers, as evidence of organic growth, and he frames his argument accordingly. I consider the relative performance as the relevant metric. It was simply growing the same rate as the wider benchmark area. It does not mean that that there is a location advantage. I see this as a situation with rising tide lifts all boats. I note Mr. Foy indicates that I did not express disagreement about his interpretation of the HVA capacity calculations. This is not accurate. I noted that he misinterprets the HVA timeframes and that this resulted in erroneous analysis. Consequently, the views expressed about short-term capacity pressures are not supported by the HVA. I consider that intensifying and growing business activity in the 2 locations are likely to dilute activity away from Kerikeri-Waipapa, generating adverse economic effects. With reference to the residential relief sought, I remain of the view that additional capacity is not required. Therefore, the tests associated with the increased HVL cannot be satisfied. Evidence of Mr. Colgrave in support of Turnstone Capital's submission. Mr. Colgrave prepared an economic assessment in support of Turnstone Capital's submission. I agree with the key points, identified benefits and risks as outlined in his report. Mr. Colgrave highlights the potential effects and risks of different sized developments, and his analysis provides some guidance. While I consider the risks of the distributional effects arising from low to moderate, if the panel is concerned about the potential effect on the Kerikeri Centre, then one way to mitigate the risk is to align with Mr. Colgrave's scenario 2. Under this scenario, the estimated trade impacts are likely to be more than offset by the growth in market demand. Mr. Colgrave did not submit any rebuttal evidence. In terms of the opportunity cost of overzoning, sufficient capacity for growth can be provided using different approaches, including greenfield and intensification options. One position that was put forward was to deliver capacity by the PDPR, the spatial plan, and the reduce, so that's the KFO. So that is all three together combined. A question that is raised is what are the opportunity costs of overzoning? The core costs relate to undermining the spatial economy and diluting the benefits arising from concentrating growth in key locations and capturing the benefits of density, particularly around urban centres. Concentration enhances accessibility, supports service viability, promotes sustainable transport shift, and improves public transport efficiency. Overzoning risks diluting these benefits as demand could be met by a few large developments away from existing centres. PDPR significantly increases the residential development capacity. Combined with the spatial plan, the sufficiency issues identified in the HVA are all addressed with sufficient capacity across attached and detached typologies, price bands, and timeframes. My analysis shows that the PDPR and the spatial plan complies with the requirements of the NPS UD.
Well, thank you very much. Very comprehensive summary. I'll start off with a couple of questions for you. And some of these reach back into the previous hearing we had last week, but I understand your analysis spans both hearings 15, C and D, is that correct? We received a lot of evidence supporting the rezoning of rural residential land to assist in the development of providing dwellings. And what we've been wrestling with is what the function of rural residential zone is in the context with other rural zones, or as a pressure valve or as a complement to urban zoning strategy. Where do you see the rural residential zone fitting in between those potentially competing objectives?
We're talking different segments of the residential market, and those different segments have their own sort of key attributes that make them attractive to live in. But I think if we zoom out a little bit and say, look, what did the HVA find when we looked at the residential market? Housing affordability is really a key driver. You know, the large segments of the community cannot actually afford cannot afford dwellings. So if we look at rural residential, those type of dwellings tend to be more expensive end of the spectrum.
Sorry, that was sorry?
Rural residential tend to be more expensive. Okay. Yeah. So what that means is there's a portion of the market that plays in that space. Households, there's a portion of households that would, you know, buy those sort of properties. But when we start looking at the overall size of the market and what share of the total can accommodate in that space, affordability is a large portion of demand that they just cannot. So what I'm saying is rural residential has a role to play. That role is not the mainstream market. Mainstream market is affordability, is driving down cost and providing a big portion of total demand in and around urban centres. That's where we actually get some of the affordability.
So, yeah, I think you sort of half answered my next question, which is it harder or more expensive to develop land for rural residential development and rural residential zone than it is to achieve intensification in the medium density zone of the current centre zone? When I say harder, is it expensive? Or, I know obviously the planning might be a little bit harder, but I suppose I'm interested in the economics of that.
So it comes down to the density issue. So when your costs, then what are your cost components? If you have a relatively large lot, of course your land value goes up. The size of your house that you put on that tend to also go up. But overall, the proportionality of land value to your total end value, land value plays a lot, captures a larger share. When you start looking at intensification, you've got smaller lots, meaning you can drive through lower your raw land value costs, put on a smaller dwelling, so it goes all of those different components combined. But I think it's also important to just not look at just the development economics of individual lots. It's also what are the wider efficiencies that you gain from developing within the urban area. So you get efficiencies in terms of your infrastructure costs, that per unit costs associated with those go down to get your economies to scale.
Because I think, some of the flavour of some of the evidence is that rural residential is easier. You don't have to connect it to anything. It's the smallest lot size that you can achieve without having to service it. And the infill intensification involves, demolishing, rebuilding, and those sorts of things. So the evidence is that it isn't necessarily more expensive.
I'd actually go and say, well, is it? What's in and what's out in that cost equation? Is it just a lot? What are the wider costs falling into the wider society? Cost per unit of the wider roads. That go up when your densities go down. So it's not just the house and lot. And while it might be easier to develop a residential type, one unit at a time, what happens if you have to do 1,000 of them? How much land are you consuming? So you get into those questions.
And to put it slightly in a more sort of KFO context, I think Mr. Thompson's evidence touches on this, is that is greenfield urban development cheaper and more affordable than intensification?
I question that. And that's work done by MFE, as I pointed out. MFE, Productivity Commission International research as well suggests that intensification options, that they're all, at a rural societal level, much more cost effective to develop. I think it's also important to note that if greenfield developments were so much easier, why is central government actually changing that? Actually, one kind of well-functioning urban environments leaning towards intensification and supporting intensification.
So is greenfield development potentially or always can lead to more affordable housing?
Say that again. Sorry.
Does greenfield development lead to allow more affordable housing to be provided?
Not necessarily, no.
And making that conclusion, what sort of factors would you have regard to?
So you need to consider all the costs that you put into greenfield development. It's not just the price of raw land. You need to provide all the infrastructure services, roads, clean waters, all of that, telecoms, also social amenities, all of those elements of cost. And the question that comes back is who pays for that? Because some of those elements, it's reasonably straightforward to go that these are the pipes, these are the roads that's directly related to those units, to those lots, A divided by B gets you your cost. But not all of the effects are actually on site. Some are off site. And who picks up the cost for that? Is that borne by the developer that gets passed on to the future homeowner, or is that picked up by society? So who benefits from some of those costs and who bears the cost? Okay.
I'd just like you to explain a little bit more about this concept of oversupply, because I think it's really relevant to this situation. I think it's a key issue in all minutes. Is it, would that be okay?
So talk about
Oversupply.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just go through that concept of how that relates to this area, Kerikeri-Waipapa, spatial planning area.
Yeah, so I think if we just step back, and this kind of ties into the context technique margin. So central government's gone through the process of what's your demand. We don't want to constrain the market, we want to make sure that there's sufficient capacity. So in order to enable sufficient capacity, lubricate the market, provide 20% extra. So that is kind of providing more demand plus 20%. So the moment we go, and I can tell you where the 20% comes from as well, that's another story. So the moment we start going beyond that, then you end up with a situation where you're enabling growth, but there's no link or line of sight back to the level of demand that you require. And then you open up situations where what happens with the land? Who pays for the services? And it also then goes to that one, if you enable too much, then you would run the risk of diluting growth away from where you actually want it. You want it close and in centres, but if you're enabling, for argument's sake, enabling capacity for 1,000 units, but you only have demand for 100, then one development that's in a suboptimal location because you can enable so much away from the centre, one development can accommodate all your demand, and then you dilute your fixed one.
Okay, so I mean, one of the issues I'm trying to wrestle with at the moment is the intensification focus of the spatial plan and the strategic direction of the PDP, and what sort of demand elements need to be in place in order to generate that level of intensification versus the supply of rural residential land, which I assume is easier to develop because it's not required. You just need pretty much to provide roading, maybe power and essential sort of services, but doesn't need to be articulated by 3 waters. Is there a risk that oversupply of that type of zoning dilutes the encouragement or even the direction of development funds to intensification? In other words, if it's easier to do rural residential development, do you ever get enough demand to achieve your intensification goals? Is that a concern for us? Or?
Well, the issue is what is affordability? So we need to address affordability in a way that people can actually, and the market can deliver houses that people can afford. So if we just look at rural residential, that's not the issue why we've got an affordability challenge. So it is addressing and stepping into that space. We're saying, what is the market issue? It's affordability. Providing rural residential land doesn't address that affordability issue. Going and providing and enabling for high densities, drives down land costs, development costs, and of course through that process changes your affordability mix.
Yes, and I suppose housing choice isn't really an. Are you saying that that intensification provides a typology options as well?
Yes. Yep. So it enables detached and attached dwellings.
Yeah.
So as part of my analysis, historically, the split between detached and attached in 90-10. In terms of the enabled capacity, the feasible capacity reflect the detached attached number. So you do have the typology change as well.
And in your experience, what sort of houses do you get in rural residential areas? I know this is pretty easy to answer.
Oh, that just be detached.
3 to 5 bedroom dwellings usually.
Yep.
With regards to the Ken Lewis land, and thank you for touching on that evidence as well. We visited that property last week, and the economist for Ken Lewis said to us that a lot of the general residential land in Kaitaia is compromised by the recent 1 in 100 year flood mapping that's undertaken by Northland Regional Council, and that a large section of that zone may be flawed or compromised, and that this land as the higher elevation, but also adjoining urban areas, would be an answer to that problem. Do you have any responding? We did question the economist, I forget his name.
Mr. Heath.
Mr. Heath, yes.
Yep.
And he conceded that analysis hadn't been done. Probably should be. And so we've got a wee bit of a chicken and egg issue to address. But have you got, from an economics point of view, have you got any response to that line of rationale?
Yeah, I mean, that ties up an interesting case. It's a small economy. And, again, it's when you look at that, so you want to enable residential intensification, as towns can put it, technology is reasonably small. But if we zoom out and say, well, we need to provide dwellings in a way that can actually broaden the employment base and the opportunities in that market. As part of our HPA modeling, we did reflect the flooding situation in there, and you looked at the cost, and that's again, we get some of this sort of interplays between it's expensive to develop, which lowers the commercial feasibility numbers. So you get those tensions coming through in that analysis. But I think it's important to kind of look sort of beyond just the here and now. It's the size of what is enabled. More than double anticipated demand, and that's where some of those potential adverse risks will come into play. But I think the overall, in my view, the overall situation is the trade-offs in the context of that local economy. What are the risks enabling a lot of residential development versus the potential benefits of intensification.
And when you say the HBA looked at flooding issues, was it the most recent modelling that we have at this point? Or?
That was around this time last year.
Yeah, so that's the same numbers. Right, thank you. Let's see if any other commissioners have any questions for you.
Yeah, I've had some similar questions to some that have been asked of you. I mean, just in terms of the response to Robert, I mean, is there a case for limiting any further rural residential zoning on the basis that it works against the urban strategy, intensification in residential?
Yeah, it's always, it's the trade-offs. If we kept something, we don't want to play back and roll. We need to acknowledge and reflect that the different demand segments and cater for those. So I don't think it's necessarily a case of putting everything back. We're putting hard limits on things, providing good locations in line with anticipated demand.
That's sort of 2.12 and 2.13 of your statement, your summary statement. I mean, it raised this question, it was getting towards oversupply that you then talked about later on in your summary statement as such. I mean, and the opportunity costs of over zoning as such. I mean, I guess in our situation, we're really in a situation where we're really wanting to try and balance the demand against the supply, and making the supply to the demand as such. You venture into the planning regime quite liberally, so perhaps economics. But I mean, how do you actually manage it? How do we actually manage that into a situation where we don't end up with undersupply or oversupply? Does that rely on us implementing a particular strategy that directs development towards the areas that we want, rather than the areas that submitters may be seeking?
Well, I mean, it's looking at across all the different disciplines, looking at their viewpoints and balancing the cost and effects of water, wastewater, and environmental effects. I mean, from an economic perspective, it's like we really want to cater and drive towards intensification, development around centres, development in good locations. So good locations might be the next step up as the sort of urban centres grow. We don't want it to be fragmented. We want it to be close and near to existing access routes and those sort of things. So it's reflecting the sort of urban design type factors in terms of how you kind of reflect the strategies. It's not just the economics of them. I think economics can tell you about the size, the quantum, so we know the demand, how big that is. Add 20% of the short medium term to make sure we're not constraining the market. So from that perspective, I think we can save ground. But it's not just the economics. We need to look across different disciplines.
Yeah, so can we get a situation there though where a landowner's in an area where we potentially want them to urbanise it, to develop, right? And we zone it accordingly, but they don't want to go there, they don't want to develop it.
Yeah.
And then you have another submitter from further out who doesn't meet the sort of 4 criteria of the type that we particularly develop for it. How do we sort of balance those?
Well, that's part of providing 20% extra. So because that's not just one location, so you're actually across multiple locations. And that's part of the thinking behind providing the competitiveness margin. It is to promote choice. And of course, by enabling choice, you also provide the real estate market, the development market to actually come in and make use of those opportunities.
Thanks.
I just had one question, thanks Mr. Boy. In terms of your 90% detached versus 10% attached now, and how did you get to the sort of 50% now that you're sort of crystal ball gazing? Is it a spatial kind of?
Yeah. So for this efficiency assessment, we kept that constant. We say we know it's going to change.
Yes.
But let's take a conservative position and do this efficiency assessment based on that. So I've got in my statement of evidence saying that if we go from 10%, that grows to 20%. What does that mean in terms of the numbers? You see that shift, but that's not the number we use for the sufficiency assessment.
Councillor Boyd, got any non-KFO related questions?
First question about Ken Lawes Limited in Kaitaia. There's very different markets in farming. Kerikeri is a different market to Kaitaia, but the development costs, the building and structure are similar. Do you have any response about those different markets and additional costs relating to hazard mitigation, for example, how that might affect zoning?
Yeah, look, mitigating hazards adds a cost. Question is, who pays that cost? Is that something that you raise? Would council implement some of those measures? But that cost is then borne by the entire community, or is that something that gets implemented and delivered by the developer when he or she develops a specific lot? If that's the case, what it essentially does is pushes up the price, lowers affordability. Those are some of the issues that we face in Kaitaia. It's like, how do we provide safe locations at a price point that people can, acknowledging that typically construction costs, rate per square metre, doesn't vary that much across locations. It's all the other components that add to the cost.
In terms of the market value,
yeah,
and overcapitalising in the two different markets, do you have any response about how the markets are different?
I mean, if you start overcapitalising, I mean, that's the cost of the property and spending too much in terms of that. But remember, in terms of when the developer does his or her due diligence, to go through the process and go, I cannot put that in place because I won't be able to sell it because the market can't pay that cost. Right? And the developer will go through the same process, Kerikeri-Waipapa Kaitaia. So, in terms of the affordability, do you have slight differences in the marketplace? Like a bigger variation in that. So you do have those differences, but it's a function of the type of households in those locations.
I had another question about housing typologies and infill development. So infill development, redevelopment, brownfields development, you have to pay to demolish the building and then build the new structure. In terms of the different costs, you've talked about having a lower land cost, a lower infrastructure cost, but then in terms of the value that might be, how does that relate to the infill development that might occur comparing 3 floors, so 12 metres, as opposed to 6 stories in height? Do you have?
So we do have different construction cost rates for the different levels. So, there are different multiple different dimensions to this, right? So if you look at the size of, let's call it a single-story dwelling, the cost per square metre comes down as the house gets slightly bigger, and that's because things like your kitchens and bathrooms, they are quite expensive and they need to be a certain size. Things like passages, rooms and those things, they're not as expensive, and as the house gets slightly bigger, the relative proportions change. We've got the same sort of factors, I guess, that come into play when you start going multiple levels. Once you start sort of going over 3, 4, maybe 5 levels, the costs really jump up. We're not, looking at 10-story type of apartment. So we do have different construction rates for different typologies.
And last question was about the minor residential unit permitted pathways. A response in terms of the how you think that will be taken by the community. I know that central government also have a rule about making that permitted under the building side as well.
I mean, this is interesting. You see this question come up in hearings. It's certainly it's called a development option, but it's certainly not something a mainstream option that's going to accommodate large chunks of the population. Part of your feasibility assessment there is an assumption that you subdivide and that you can actually sell it. So you're doing commercial feasibility, and we know that can be acknowledged that there are non-mainstream development actors, especially some community housing type providers. They don't follow a commercial feasible model process. They've got other things, other factors that they reflect in their due return. Same with sort of family households. They can actually accommodate some family members in sort of non-dwellings, but it's not a we don't see this as a mechanism to accommodate large segments of the population.
Right, well, thank you very much for all your work today and for your presentation today and the answer to our questions.
Okay, now we go to Mr. Collins, the transport expert, who is also prepared a summary and we'll kick off with that.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm mindful of having Mr. Fisher on the shoulder to be brief, so I will race through my summary statement. Feel free to interrupt me at any point if you'd like me to dig a little deeper on any particular issues. So I'll jump to section 2 of my summary statement. Jumping to sentence 2, the KFO site is proposed to be accessed from State Highway 10 at Waipapa Road. Potential connections, transport connections to Kerikeri are proposed. However, these would require third-party land. While Mr. Brown was responsible for preparing the transport assessment for KFO's submission and evidence in chief on behalf of KFO, Mr. Hughes has been appointed to undertake an independent peer review and to provide rebuttal evidence for KFO. The transport modelling provided by Flow Transport and discussed by Mr. Brown refers to a 10-year or 50% and a 20-year or 100% development scenarios. In his rebuttal evidence, Mr. Hughes has instead named these stage 1 and stage 2. I have therefore adopted Mr. Hughes' naming in my statement. For clarity, I have reproduced the yields sent by Mr. Brown for stage 1 and stage 2 in table 1 of my summary. Essentially, stage 1 is about 2/3 of the total anticipated dwellings and 50% of non-residential activity. And stage 2 is 100% of all activities. Moving on to the proposed accesses. So KFO's submission proposed 4 primary access points to connect the site to the surrounding transport network. These were labelled Access A through to D on the proposed precinct plan. Access A is a new roundabout on State Highway 10. Access B and Access C were to Urban Road and Golfview Drive, and both of these would require third-party land. Access D provides a connection and realignment of Waitotara Drive, which would connect to Waipapa Road. The 3 access points, being A, B, and either B or C, can be secured. I consider the site would benefit from reasonable transport connectivity. If not, in my view, the site would be isolated from Kerikeri, limiting connectivity and increasing transport inefficiencies within an existing transport network. 3 pedestrian cyclist only access points are also proposed, but again, these rely on third-party land and or off-site improvements that are not addressed in the submission or in the evidence filed by KFO. Even with these connections, I consider cycling trips to and from the site. I consider that walking trips to and from the site will be largely limited to recreational trips due to the distance between the site and Kerikeri and Waipapa. Cycling trips to Waipapa are feasible. However, cycling trips to Kerikeri may be limited due to those of extremely able-bodied or those that have access to electric bike.
You said interrupt as we...
Yes.
Is that topography?
That's the
topography really?
Yeah, so the access B or C involve quite significant topography. And without those connections, cycling access to Kerikeri would be via Access D, Waipapa Road, Heritage Bypass, and then into Kerikeri, which I think I covered off the distance in my statement of evidence, but I consider that was of a distance that did not make cycling a feasible option for most people.
I have a supplementary question, not about the category side. The shed along Kerikeri Road, is it on figure 1 of your evidence? It talks about the shared path and also highlights the hybrid scenario. So this is from the spatial plan land use scenarios.
Yes.
The evidence from the economist relating to Mr. Foy's evidence says that it's too far from Kerikeri and Waipapa to be feasible. This is for the Audrey Freer submission. But in this diagram here, it shows that it's in a hybrid scenario, so it has pedestrian links, and you did also talk about cycling. So do you have any response about those sites on Kerikeri Road and near the roundabout of Kerikeri?
In terms of cycling accessibility through to Kerikeri?
Yeah, in terms of connectivity and
I would say the pack house site is reasonably accessible by cycling. There's an existing scheduled path, I think, along part of Kerikeri Road. I'm not sure if it goes the full way up to the pack house, but as I understand it, the spatial plan intends to have cycling facilities along Kerikeri Road. So I would say the pack house site would have reasonable connectivity to Kerikeri.
And the Redwoods site?
I would say that would have poor connectivity because there would not be any cycling infrastructure to there unless there was sort of large-scale redevelopment, I guess, within that triangle of State Highway 10, Kerikeri Road. You don't have any direct connection across.
In front of the sculpture.
Yeah, so everyone's going to have to come down State Highway 10 and then onto Kerikeri Road, and State Highway 10 is not what I would call it hospitable for cycling. So even though it has the two issues of being more remote and also an inhospitable for cycling environment on State Highway 10. And I don't think at this stage the scheduled path goes all the way down Kerikeri Road to the State Highway 10 roundabout. So even once they do get to Kerikeri Road, there's still not that infrastructure the whole way through.
Thank you.
So picking up at, sorry, lost my point, picking up at 2.7, paragraph 2.8 of my summary. Through rebuttal evidence, KFO now proposes only 2 access points. That's access A and D for stage 1, which I consider to be a significant change in the proposal. KFO still relies on 3 access points, access A, C and D for stage 2. However, as I previously noted, access C requires third-party land, and KFO has not confirmed it has support of the landowner to deliver this access. So in terms of traffic modelling methodology, under the direction of Mr Brown, Flow Transport has undertaken traffic modelling using the Council's Kerikeri transport model. They tested 3 scenarios: a PDP scenario, which was based on the notified PDP, not the PDPR scenario, a stage 1 KFO scenarios. For this, they modelled a 2-axis scenario, A and B, and also a 3-axis scenario, A, C and D. And they also assessed stage 2 scenarios, and for that they tested with and without the Kerikeri bypass, CBD bypass, and just to reiterate that stage 2 testing assumed that 3 access points would be provided. I have concerns about the following modelling inputs adopted for the KFO scenarios, including a residential trip rate of 0.5 vehicles per hour per dwelling versus the Kerikeri transport model trip rate for greenfield areas, which assumes a 0.75 vehicles per hour per dwelling. Commercial, retail and employment activity trip rates that are lower than industry standards, and a very high rate of internalisation of trips for non-residential activities. So 50% of trips generated by those activities are assumed to remain internal to the site. My analysis indicates that these assumptions could underpredict external trips generated by stage one by between 245 and 680 vehicles per hour in the P and peak. And this equates to an additional one vehicle every 5 to 14 seconds, which is a substantial increase in traffic. Moving on to the traffic modelling results. In his assessment, Mr. Brown compares the network performance under the PDP and stage one KFO scenarios. However, as the KFO scenarios use trip rates that are generally lower than industry standard and employ higher internalisation of trips, it likely underpredicts the potential effects of the KFO scenarios compared to the PDP scenario. For stage one KFO scenario with access A and B, as proposed by KFO through their rebuttal evidence, the heritage bypass is predicted to be under significant pressure, particularly in the A and peak. Significant delays are also predicted at the State Highway 10 Waipapa Road intersection, with the Northern State Highway 10 approach and Waipapa Loop Road West operating at level of service F during the P and peaks. The stage 2 KFO scenarios have not assessed the potential effects of development with only access A and B, and given the stage 1 results which I've discussed above, there's a risk that stage 2 cannot mitigate its effects on the transport network in the absence of access B or C. I would expect the results of stage 2 with only 2 access points would be extensive delays at State Highway, that should say State Highway 10, not State Highway 1, Waipapa Road, again a correction, State Highway 10, Kerikeri Road, and capacity issues on Kerikeri Road and Heritage Bypass during the P and peak, during peak hours. I provide preliminary comments on KFO's revised access strategy in section 3 of my summary. I might skip over transport policy unless you particularly want me to talk to that.
Thank you.
And I'll move to section 3, response to matters raised in KFO rebuttal evidence. I have reviewed the rebuttal evidence of Mr. Hughes, Ms. O'Connor, Mr. Brownlee and Mr. Neal, and I make the following comments, noting that a full right of reply will be provided by the Section 48 team, including additional expert input as required following the hearing. So the first topic is transport modelling and access C. On the matter of transport modelling, Mr. Hughes provides extensive comments in his rebuttal evidence. I paraphrase key aspects of his evidence in italicised paragraphs below and provided my preliminary response. With each of my paraphrasing of Mr. Hughes' evidence, I've provided a reference from his rebuttal where I pulled that from. So the first comment that I pulled from his rebuttal was he emphasised that Flow Transport are Council's appointed transport modeller and have used the Kerikeri transport model, which is Council's strategic model for this area. I agree with those statements. However, while Flow Transport are Council's appointed traffic modeller, it is Mr. Brown, acting for KFO, that directed Flow to adopt unique trip generation assumptions and internal capture rates when modelling the KFO scenarios. Flow's role was to operate the transport model using the inputs and assumptions provided by Mr. Brown, and the modelling inputs and interpretation of results were directed by Mr. Brown. So the second aspect is trip generation assumptions are based on local Kerikeri survey evidence and comprehensive, robust and internalisation assumptions are appropriate for the proposed mixed-use precinct. In response to that, Mr. Brown's residential trip generation assumptions were based off one-off surveys of 3 sites in Kerikeri. They were Access Road, Aranga Road and Waitotara Drive. Mr. Brown proceeded to discount the Waitotara Drive survey as it had a higher peak generation rate of 0.916 vehicles per hour per dwelling. Mr. Brown does not explain why he adopted the lower residential trip rate for the KFO scenarios, yet maintained a higher default rate for the PDP scenario. The non-residential trip rates used by Mr. Brown were mostly lower than industry standard, with limited explanation for their selection. Notable deviations from what I would expect included supermarket, large format retail and commercial activities were assumed to be closed in the AM peak and would not generate any traffic. Supermarket, large format retail and commercial services trip rate were based off an integrated transport assessment, an ITA, not surveys, for a site in New Plymouth that Mr. Brown prepared an ITA for. I have not been provided that ITA, so I've not reviewed it. I disagree with Mr. Hughes that commercial trip rates specified in my statement of evidence are for generic regional centres. My trip rates were based on Trips Database Bureau data, which is based on multiple surveys across a range of locations in New Zealand, and I consider these surveys to be a fair representation of development proposed at the KFO site. My approach is industry standard practice and preferable to using data from singular and unrelated projects, particularly where the relevance of these projects to the KFO site is unclear. It is common for transport engineers to apply reduction factors to these industry standard trip rates when assessing large-scale developments. For example, reductions can be given for, that should say, trip changing, not trip changing, pass-by trips, etc. However, the trip rates used by Mr. Brown essentially double dip on these reductions by applying a low initial trip rate and then further factoring these down by an additional 50%. This approach risks underestimating actual trip generation. Mr. Hughes has not provided empirical evidence to support the rates adopted by Mr. Brown, and I do not agree with Mr. Hughes' assertion that these rates are conservative and robust. Moving on to topic 3, internalisation assumptions were derived by team traffic based on the development mix, with some guidance from Mr. Thompson, the economics expert, and are appropriate for KFO site. Empirical evidence to support KFO's internalisation assumptions has not been provided by Mr. Brown, Mr. Thompson or Mr. Hughes. I remain of the view that these assumptions are significantly overstated, particularly given the scale of the proposed non-residential zone land. Point 4, the modelling of the PDP and KFO scenarios provides a direct comparison using the same council-endorsed model. Given the inconsistent approach to the trip generation, which I previously discussed, I disagree with Mr. Hughes that the modelling of the PDP and the KFO scenarios provide a direct comparison. Point 5, at the 10-year horizon, the results show that the network performs acceptably even with only 2 accesses. If a higher trip generation rates were applied, the difference would be incremental rather than transformative. Further, the KFO development does not produce any additional pressure on the transport network beyond that already expected under the PDP scenario. So my response to that is, even if the PDP and KFO scenarios were comparable, Mr. Hughes' conclusion regarding the PDP and KFO scenarios is incorrect. He appears to be comparing the PDP scenario with the stage 1 3-axis KFO scenario rather than the stage 1 2-axis KFO scenario. The flow modelling indicates that the stage 1 2-axis KFO scenario results in greater effects on the transport network in the PDP scenario, and the KFO does not propose to mitigate the following effects identified by the flow modelling. State Highway 10 Waipapa Road intersection is indicated to operate at level of service F, with the northern approach of State Highway 1 having 200 metres queuing versus a level of service E under the PDP scenario. There's a significant increase in delays on State Highway 10 during the AM and PM peaks in the southbound direction. So the travel time is increased by 33 seconds and 45 seconds in the AM and PM peaks respectively. Capacity constraints on the Heritage Bypass in the southbound direction during the AM peak. The PDP scenario estimated 980 vehicles per hour, whereas the KFO Stage 1 scenario with only 2 accesses estimated 1,160 vehicles per hour. Moving on to Statement 6, Flow found that Stage 2 can be accommodated within the transport network, but that further improvements to the wider Kerikeri transport network may be required at full development. However, the flow modelling did not identify any fundamental or fatal flaw that would complete rezoning. In response, I say that the flow only Stage 2 with 3 access points and had not tested the network effects of Stage 2 with only 2 access points. I have seen no evidence to demonstrate what the likely effects are, whether there are any fundamental fatal flaws, and therefore whether the development can be supported on the basis of only 2 accesses being available. Mr. Hughes has stated that he considers the need or otherwise for a third access can be determined at a later date. I disagree with this approach as at a high level, I would expect the results of Stage 2 with only 2 access points would be extensive delays at State Highway 10 Waipapa Road, State Highway 10, correction there, rather than State Highway 1, Kerikeri Road, and capacity issues on State Highway 10 in Waipapa, Kerikeri, and the Heritage Bypass during peak hours. In other words, I think it is likely that Stage 2 with only 2 access points would result in significant effects on the transport network that would require significant and potentially infeasible upgrades of the existing transport network. These effects need to be sense tested and the feasibility of any mitigations, such as intersection upgrades or alternative access points, investigated prior to rezoning. Failure to do so may lead to Stage 2 of the site being zoned but unable to be developed, or Stage 2 going ahead but with significant impacts on the transport network. I think Mr. Fisher covered off a fair bit of that around enabling land that can't be developed, or in my experience, the likelihood of incremental development that then creates those effects on the network and is left to be managed by council or NZTA. So moving to point 7, the flow modelling also supported a staged access strategy. For Stage 1 of the KFO development, a combination of a new State Highway 10 roundabout and the Waitotara Drive connection provides a safe and efficient arrangement that is consistent with the model outcomes. Introducing a third access via the golf course connection at this early stage risks creating unnecessary through routing between Waipapa and Kerikeri without providing actual benefits for the performance of the external network. As I've noted above, my opinion is that Stage 1 2 access scenario does create significant effects on State Highway 10. I do not share Mr. Hughes' view that providing access B or C with Stage 1 in addition to access A and D would create risks for the transport network. In my opinion, failure to provide either access C or B will isolate the KFO site from Kerikeri, which will increase private vehicle dependency and increase trip lengths. A 2-access strategy could be acceptable in the short and medium term, noting my view that off-site mitigation is required to support Stage 1. However, if KFO fails to secure a third access point, I consider a 2-access strategy a critical flaw for the proposal. The matter of the third access needs to be resolved prior to rezoning rather than kicking the can down the road for future assessments. Moving on to infrastructure staging and funding.
Sorry, I might just interject there. Is the panel, we're getting into quite a bit of detail, is the panel comfortable with the detail and the pacing, or do we want to?
Oh, I'm conscious that we have other witnesses to get through, so I'm sort of happy with the pace being sort of reasonably quick. The detail obviously we're absorbing it as well as we can.
Yeah, that's the thing. The question is, are there any parts that could, in this, that could be taken as read, which might sort of...
Well, we'll be guided by you. I think if you think we're happy to be guided by you, we'll go back to all of these statements and read them in detail and then compare them with the original statements as well.
I think particularly where your witnesses get to critiquing the evidence of other expert witnesses for KFO or whatever, they can perhaps list what the concerns are rather than detailing. You've got concerns about the following matters as explained in the evidence. We'll just tend to process some parts of the evidence.
Yeah, so perhaps keep that in mind as we go through this. If you can raise it as a general issue and know that the panel's going to come back to it and refer back to it later, we might get through.
So on infrastructure, staging and funding, I will jump down to paragraph 3.20, where I am discussing what should be provided, in my view, what should be provided in a precinct plan, and what should be determined at rezoning rather than addressing these matters at resource consent stage. Discussing the KFO proposal, it carries significant uncertainty and lacks confidence the effects of stage 2 can be managed in the absence of access B or C. And it does not include provisions to ensure development is staged with off-site mitigations and enabling infrastructure, such as mitigations at State Highway 10, Waipapa Road for stage 1, and the Kerikeri CBD bypass for stage 2. Covering the precinct provisions, I will jump down to paragraph 3.24, where I'm discussing standard 2, which requires an integrated transport assessment. While standard 2 is a positive step, it does not address fundamental concerns with KFO's proposal as raised in my statement of evidence, namely the unsuitability of rezoning if the third access cannot be provided. And if it can't be provided, it will increase private vehicle dependency and trip distances and will be isolated from Kerikeri. And the full development will result in unknown and potentially unmanageable effects. The standard 2 does not address staging and funding responsibilities for off-site transport infrastructure. A framework should be established prior to rezoning rather than through the resource consenting process. So jumping down to paragraph 3.25, broadly speaking, there may be potential to address the concerns above through revised precinct provisions that gave greater certainty to staging, funding and delivery of infrastructure. This comes with a major caveat that I have reservations about relying on the current transport modelling assessments for both stage 1 and stage 2, and therefore caution basing precinct provisions solely on these assessments. However, I have seen no evidence to demonstrate the likely effects of rezoning the site and whether the development can be supported on the basis of only 2 accesses being available. The uncertainty regarding access B and C is a critical issue for stage 2 and will have negative effects on stage 1. Without the link to Kerikeri, the proposal would have poor connectivity for general traffic, active transport and public transport. It will place greater pressure on State Highway 10, Kerikeri Road and Heritage Bypass, and has unmanaged or unquantified effects on the transport network. Furthermore, there remains uncertainty regarding the staging, funding and delivery of infrastructure. These residual uncertainties need to be addressed prior to rezoning approval. Happy to take further questions.
Right, thank you. I mean, where I think I've been greatly assisted with, I've been trying to find the plan that shows the stage 1 and stage 2 is. Can you refer to me which is the best plan available? Anyone, this is an open question. Well, there's a reference to stage 1 and stage 2, which I'm thinking stage 1 is sort of around Waipapa and Waipapa Road and stage. I'm sort of interpreting it either side of the floodway. But is there a plan that shows?
In my view, there is no clear stage 1 or stage 2. It's just based on the assumption that 1,600 dwellings for transport effects.
Right. Okay. So it's stage 1, stage 2, wherever that may be, but we know that they can only be accessed by A or D.
Those are the only confirmed
Which
access.
suggests, well, it suggests to me it's sort of up in the sort of northern west corner. Is it roundabout? And
I think that highlights some of the uncertainty that
right.
we're dealing with.
So you're in just as much doubt as I am. Yeah, because I thought maybe there was
That sort of standard for the up to 1600 ones came in through rebuttal evidence, and as I understand, primarily just based on capital X. So the clarity around staging is very uncertain at this stage.
Yeah, but I mean, because I had a number of questions. I'm not as confused as Mr. Brown, given the time constraints. Maybe I'll focus more on them rather than you. But I was trying to get my head around sort of bridges that are necessary.
Yes.
You know, the infrastructure things.
Yes.
Obviously, option access C involves a couple of bridges.
It would involve a new bridge to the existing golf course bridge would need to be replaced. I haven't paid a lot of attention to the alignment of the road through the golf course land. But I think access B would also require a bridge.
Yes, well, that most definitely, right?
Yeah, so, and as I understand it, the submission was it would be either access C or B, not both, and that's what I faced, but now it's through rebuttal, it's shifted to access C seems to be KFO's preferred third access. However, this still requires it.
Access D would require a bridge just before you.
It would, yes, add a realignment of Waitotara Drive. But as I understand it, that realignment of Waitotara Drive could be delivered KFO because they have ownership of that land, or one of the parties has ownership of
on
that
the other
land.
side.
Yes.
Yeah, of the street. And assuming getting across the floodway, that would require a bridge.
It would, yes.
And if we were minded to, well, if we wanted those two areas to be connected,
Yes.
well, it seems to me it needs to be there. If you're going to have access A and access B, you're going to have some method of crossing.
Yes.
Do you understand whether that is a bridge?
There's no discussion of that in the transport aspects. I would assume it would need to be a bridge. I agree with your concerns about that, and that's one of my concerns around the precinct provisions, is that the precinct plan shows it in action through there, but my reading of the Rule 5 for the Comprehensive Development Plan doesn't really link to that. So feasibly, you could get a development scenario where you have access A and access D, but no through-side connectivity. I think that is a feasible outcome of the proposed provisions.
Okay, and I'll try to get my head around the width, and I've read in a number of statements. If anybody here can correct me, around about 120 metres is the width of the floodway, because we're using its natural boundaries, right? We're not constructing a channel.
That's I can call it direct and flooding.
Yeah.
120 metres is right.
Yeah, okay. Okay, good. Well, those are my questions. I've got a number of them. Are you going to be around at the end of the year? Okay, well, maybe I'll have enough paper questions for you then.
Yeah.
If we could do it.
No, just a comment really based on your evidence. I mean, what comes through it is probably reflects a propensity on a lot of submitters to deal with matters by way of additional assessments once they achieve a precinct. And it just seems to be that some of the other submitters we've heard, a few of them have put that right up front as they've been asked to do so by minute 14. Maybe to do so presents us with some difficulties.
Yeah, and that's where a lot of my concern comes from, is that there are too many unresolved aspects at this stage for me to have comfort in the rezoning. It's not. I don't have the information to say that whether the rezoning or not can manage its effects. And my concern with sorting that out at resource consent stage is as you'll know, through the resource consenting process, there's that incremental staging of development can happen when you have small scale effects that add up to large cumulative effects that don't necessarily get addressed.
The only other evidence supplied, rebuttal evidence, was from Leo Hills.
Yes.
Did you have comments on that? Because you haven't made comments.
No, that's right. I have provided some preliminary comments to council, and I will probably, Sarah, do you want me to go over that now, or? I can cover it now, or just I'm conscious of time frame.
Cover it later, it's fine.
Yep, cool.
Just sort of telegraph it now. Okay, I think that's all the questions for you at this stage.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Comprehensive summary there. There's Mr. Hensley next. Good afternoon, Mr. Hensley. Welcome back.
Mr. Hensley is going to start with that. It's too much.
Well, could I say maybe it would be better if you moved closer to the microphone, just in case.
Yeah.
Sorry, I should have said that before you said something.
Everyone else is vacating at the same time.
Mr. Hensley is going to start with a correction to his evidence, an amendment, and then he'll step through his summary and we'll go to questions in the usual way. So the correction is that Mr. Hensley is going to make is paragraph 6.2 of his evidence.
Primarily the last sentence in that statement of evidence, which
6.2 was it?
yeah. So the wording, the last sentence, the combined costing, I'd like to ask that be removed, please. And the reason being that at the time that we were trying to bring all the evidence together, all the words together, was a combination of the spatial plan we developed. There was the hearings around KFO. There's also a lot of work going on with regard to the forward look of the CCO and Commissioner Freud's looked at it several times. So we'll cover that in a bit more detail through the course of this. But in that context, numbers were inadvertently added together. That's not the case, but the point remains that the cost is significant. Just we haven't had a chance to properly bring that together yet. Okay.
Thank you.
So in terms of my summary, I refer to my qualifications and experience in the original statement. I don't intend to repeat those. The statements provide a summary of my evidence. By way of summary, I consider that PDPR option for intensifications are able to be supported, enabled in the short term by existing capacity available within the public infrastructure network, as well as identified upgrades and improvements which are currently planned for and funded. As has been brought up a couple of times, recently the district councils in Northland have resolved to form a council-controlled organisation, CCO. In that organisation, wastewater and water will, going forward, will be managed by the CCO, but stormwater will remain with the local council. So in terms of the LTP plan going forward, it will only reflect stormwater for the time being, as the water and wastewater will be covered by the CCO using the electrical services strategy. It's important to, I'll just digress a little just to try and clarify some of the questions that were asked a little earlier. In the development of the water service delivery plan for the CCO, which has now been approved, each of the three councils submitted bespoke forward work programs for their respective areas, which obviously FNDC did the same. Within that,
there is very specifically, there are several buckets of money, if you like, which cover both a 3-year and a 10-year forward work program, as well as a 30-year look ahead. In that, there are specific categorizations for health and safety, compliance, level of service, and growth. So all of those categories are allowed for in terms of the development of not only the next 3-year LTP, if you like, but also for the look ahead for the CCO. In the same way any other planning organisation works, how that will evolve over time will be constantly reviewed on a regular basis. But just need to make it really clear that there is nothing that will prejudice the engagement of growth in Northland any more than we're currently constrained by finance. So moving forward, maybe before I move on, are there any more questions around the CCO?
My question earlier today about having the legal question being referenced as a statutory document, it's a contract that's required under statute from the central government, and it has a bearing on how people are able to have infrastructure or not. So I think the question is to both legal and yourself as a council officer, how do those two interrelate in terms of how we forward plan for growth?
So I'm not sure of the legal position. What I can tell you is that the processes within the CCO are being established now to ensure that all areas of the region, whether it be Te Hapua in the far north or Kerikeri or Whangarei, get treated with equal vigour. And
I did ask as well about the different tiers.
Correct, so, the 2 and 3 on the country.
Yes. And so that's part of the EPSUD, but I'm not sure how that works in the context of the Northland CCO there. Whangarei are tier 2, we're tier 3, and Kaipara are not a tier. How does that work in terms of prioritising the CCO to do XYZ and infrastructure provision associated with that within the work program?
Are you asking? I'm not quite following exactly what you're getting at.
Does Whangarei get the priority for growth, or the infrastructure for Northland? The priority is to go to the tier 2 because they're tier 2, or is there also it equal weighting because we're tier 3? Do we get an equal weighting?
We all tier 1, 2, and 3 all have to provide sufficient development capacity, and the same policy direction applies. And the directive is that part of being sufficient development capacity is that it's infrastructure ready. So part of that obligation applies to all tiers of local authorities. So in terms of being infrastructure ready, it's the case that the Northern Waters CCO is going to step in where it would have otherwise been the council and become responsible for planning infrastructure going forward. As Mr. Hensley says, we've got 3-year, 10-year plans and then a long-year plan. So that strategy is, as I understand it, going to be developed.
Yes, so yeah, and to date there has been, it's absolutely, it's based on need, right? So obviously each area is considered in its own merits, and there's been no discussion whatsoever about, for want of a better word, preferential treatment of Whangarei. None at all. Now, the negotiations of how we will prioritise is still to be worked through. That's my next challenge.
Okay. And there's nothing in the EPSUD that assigns priority between tier 1, 2, 3. It's just more specific for tier 1, tier 2 local authorities.
It's more prescriptive in terms of the analysis and the obligations that go into the capacity work.
But because Whānau have a future development strategy doesn't mean that, because we don't, they don't get priority.
No. Each council has to, in making its planning decisions, give effect to the NPSUD. Funding, the NPSUD doesn't get into funding allocation between councils within a shared water services organisation.
It might be worth noting that the ability for the CCO to borrow is greatly enhanced by being part of the CCO. So maybe just moving on to 2.3 of my summary, the PDPR option for intensification requires investment in water treatment plant capacity in the short term, and funding has already been allocated for that, as well as reservoir capacity, wastewater network capacity, and wastewater treatment plant capacity in the medium to long term. Medium and long-term investment relating to water supply and wastewater infrastructure will be planned and funded through the newly established Northern Water CCO. Sufficient raw water resources are available to service growth. Council's existing stormwater infrastructure and pipe network will require investment for both upgrades and extensions over time in order to cater for anticipated future growth. I consider there remains uncertainty, however, as to indeed if any the proposed infrastructure servicing plan proposed by KFO is able to be consented, funded and delivered. If it can be, I am of the opinion that while the site may be able to be serviced in the future to support potential urban growth, significant further work is required to demonstrate how the necessary infrastructure upgrades will be funded, by whom, and how KFO's servicing plan will support the wider plans and strategy for infrastructure servicing and funding for the benefit of the wider Kerikeri-Waipapa community. In relation to servicing strategy proposed by KFO, I note the following. A significant water supply extension will be required to feed into the development either from Gulf View Road or Waipapa Road. Additional pipeline upgrades are also likely to be needed. Servicing this area would likely result in a dead-end line, which is not desirable from a pressure quality perspective. Secondly, and probably most important from my perspective, an extension of the Kerikeri wastewater network would also be required to service the development. Upgrades of existing wastewater pipes on Gulf Road are likely to be needed. The development would likely require a pump station and long-term rising main. In the early stages of development, problems may be likely with low flows coming into the pump station, causing septicity in the line and downstream network. A standalone wastewater treatment plant development on this site, as suggested by the submitter, as a temporary option until the public reticulation is funded and installed, is not preferred due to ongoing maintenance and operational requirements. It is also noted that the capital cost of such a wastewater treatment plant per property is much higher when compared with larger plants servicing the wider community. Any such temporary standalone scheme will likely generate the need for site rehabilitation and remediation works at the time of switching from standalone to scheme to reliance on the wider public infrastructure. At this stage, there is no detail provided in relation to how these rehabilitation and remediation works would be undertaken, what would be required, and who would fund such works. This could involve costs to the responsible entity, e.g. Northern Water CCO, and may run the risk of diverting important funding away from investment into the network improvements, which benefit the wider community in favour of allocation of funds for the primary benefit of one developer or development. So historically, just to put a bit more context on that, we frequently find that third-party wastewater plants suffer from lack of technical expertise to run them and increasing compliance costs of running those, and inevitably the council winds up incurring additional cost in maintaining those or upgrading them. Secondly, or thirdly I should say, an extended new road network is required with parts of the network inside the flood prone areas. 2 new bridges and an upgrade to the Gulf View Road Bridge would be necessary A major new intersection roundabout on State Highway 10 is required to facilitate this. To date, KFO has not provided binding commitments or evidence confirming responsibility for the funding of the full infrastructure would likely be required to support development of the site. While it is expected that some costs could potentially be recovered through development contributions, development agreements or similar mechanisms, in the absence of such certainty, I consider that the rezoning of the KFO site for urban use presents significant financial risk to the responsible entity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hensley.
Yeah, just one question on the private wastewater systems in Northland. Are there any examples that are similar to the scale of what's been proposed here, including commercial and residential?
Well, we've got at least one system where they're asking for the council to take it over.
Yeah.
And it's smaller than this, and the cost of maintaining that is significant.
Yeah.
With this one, for argument's sake, if they went to putting in a set of ponds as an interim measure, the cost of removing those ponds and rehabilitating at the point that you convert it back to the public system would be very significant. I'm not sure who would cover that cost. But once you go into that kind of trade waste time scenario, you're winding up with relocating it off-site, and it's a very, very expensive exercise. Okay. So those just a couple of examples.
No, that's helpful. Thank you.
A good statement from an engineer, short to the point.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hensley. You'll be available later on in the
sure.
hearing process with the further questions or the other evidence. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, that takes us to 1 o'clock.
We've got to 3. I want to keep the powering through. What I'm hoping is we'll get through the witnesses and we'll have a short break before our next witness comes. You look like you wanted to address me.
Listening in the ears.
Okay, right. Look, I think we'll try and do. I think that's we'll try and get through the rest of the witnesses and then maybe have a break for the next submission.
Okay.
Does everyone agree? Good.
So we had Mr. McDonald. Mr. McDonald there, as I said earlier, he's we can take any, if there are any questions, we can take them back to him, and if he needs to be called later, we can try and arrange that. But in the meantime, we'll go to Mr. Lindenberg.
Yeah, we can get him on call at the end of the hearing. Possibly.
I believe so.
We'll keep that as an open question.
Yeah, just give us the indication, and we'll look to arrange it.
Well, it'll be Wednesday. If anything. So, you're Mr. Lindenberg?
I am. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
This is where I'm going to attempt to speed things up a little bit.
So I put you under any undue pressure, but yes.
I have a very short summary statement. There is nothing new or additional to it. It is really a pull from my executive summary of my primary statement, so there has been nothing new that had come about through the KFO rebuttal that I had addressed. So for the sake of my summary is effectively read as my executive summary and my primary statement, I would be happy to go straight to questions that suit the panel.
Okay, thank you. Well, really just 3 pages, and the first page is just telling us who you are and what your evidence is going to say, and then you can then spend like a paragraph saying it. Thanks for that. I'll see if anyone's got any questions for you.
No, I don't. Although after my last comment, I was going to say the plan is permitted to speak extensively. It's just the engineers who report that.
Yeah.
Okay, well then you've gone off lightly.
I mean, there was a bit of discussion this morning, generally about ESUD,
yes,
about application, about what's what. Happy to have a corridor discussion about any of those aspects.
Yes, I mean, I mean, I asked the question as to, relationship between the NPSUD sort of directing people and stuff, but also allowing tier 3.
The difference between the language throughout the document for the ones and twos versus the threes. Yeah.
I think Mr. Fisher's answer was really helpful in the sense that your objectives and policies are still as directive to a tier 3 local authority as they are to 1 and 2. It's just a specific thing tiers 1 and 2 have to do. And I understand that the only thing that a tier 3 local authority has to do is the car parking.
I would say a little bit more than that.
Okay, so if you
So
could
I
perhaps
would
give us
point
that.
you to policy 2
Okay,
in the first instance. Because policy 2 is a requirement and it feeds into other aspects, and it is around the issues of capacity. And so straight away, policy 2 is a tier 1, 2 and 3 local authorities as to what they all need to do.
I just happen to have a version of the NPSUD on my desktop. So this is tier 1, 2 and 3 local authorities at all times to provide, this is the meeting the short, medium and long, yes.
1, 2s and 3s have to address the issue of capacity and supply. It really just then gets into the nuance of at what level of detail do you need to robustly go through?
Yeah, and so then I put some questions to Mr. Fisher, which is, well, you don't have to do an HBA, but you've chosen to.
Yes.
How would you provide for that if you did do an HBA? Well, you could just put things down like that. But the evidence is you're not required to do an HBA, you could use other methodology. Would it be fair to say that the spatial plan has relied on the HBA as if it were a tier 1 and 2 local authority?
Absolutely.
In that sense, they've done a proper HBA and relied on it.
And as a council, who in the first instance, I guess from the earliest minute, from the panel around the issue of the NPSUD, there's straight away the grappling trying to understand where do we fit if we're not tier 1 or 2?
Yeah.
Are we a 3?
Yes.
What makes us a 3?
And if you're 3 for 1 community, I think I made the comment at the time, you can't be a little bit pregnant.
It is. Yeah. And so straight away you get to this 10,000, the urban area, the urban environment, at what point in time might it be 10,000 or not? And from my involvement in the work with the council here, I've seen a tier 3 local authority really being quite proactive in addressing their future growth and how to provide for it. And, quite sort of boldly and proactive saying, yeah, we will take on being an urban environment. And we will start planning for that as a tier 3. And while our PDP didn't include the medium density residential design, we've had submitters come to the table and asking for this, and we can see how this fits into the MUD requirement for a tier 3. So it's been, as a planner, as a consultant who's done a lot of work for kind of New Zealand over the years, with the NPSUD and addressing councils in various formats. I had one maybe a month ago that was a tier 2, and they hadn't in their HBA done infrastructure ready. They hadn't done potential development capacity as a tier 2, and they weren't too concerned about not having done that level of detail. And at the same time, I've been part of this council team watching the council working behind the scenes effectively. So we're going to appropriately take on a tier 3, and the right way we think to work through this is starting to understand it and analyse it as if we're a tier 2 and doing that level of detail and assessment, because it's just how you need to understand the issue legally. And so that's why I think that's why you get in the NPSUD a policy that says tier 1s and 2s need to have housing bottom lines that get put in regional plans and district plans. And I think that's why there's only HBAs for tier 1s and 2s required, because you have that policy requirement to state those bottom lines. But for a tier 3 trying to understand demand and capacity and supply, you have to effectively engage in a version of an HBA to understand.
And just to clarify one matter that was brought to my attention last week, the NPSUD has a focus, it's compact urban. But Ms. Pearson helpfully pointed to strategic policy UFDO2, which also refers to compact urban. Do you accept that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Excellent.
So whether whether it's in the SPD or not, the PDP has a focus on content land.
That's correct. And also a little bit of the discussion I heard earlier around the affordability and the choice and the time. My work and involvement with the MPSUD and planning frameworks trying to implement this direction as a planner within urban environments, the most important thing for me has been we need to build into planning frameworks that better enable different choices of housing types and products. When you get into economic assessments of demand and supply, we've got to bear in mind in Kerikeri, in the far north, previously also on somewhere like Whangarei, you've got a 10 to 20 years legacy of a planning framework that had only enabled single dwelling standalone type of residential living, and you've got a choice between that and an urban environment or a bigger standalone house on a bigger site out in the rural residential. If you continue with those two versions of type and choice, you will never address affordability. You will only ever have single dwelling housing types on ever increasing footprints. You're only dealing with size of site, size of land, size of houses. And if you're just dealing with single dwellings everywhere, you can never address affordability comprehensively, which is what the MPSUD is asking you to do, which is why a council will recommend an MDRZ, because it better enables those choices of the different housing sizes, and getting different choice, getting different size, gets different price points.
Yeah, just finally, I was trying to get my head around the sort of outcomes that the town centre zone, and particularly medium density residential zone, is trying to achieve. Now, we're staying at the Kerry-Gold chalets.
All right.
And I noticed that sort of just down the road and across the road, is it called Dennis Yates Way? Would that be an example of the sort of, you've got sort of like two-storey walk-ups there?
Just before you get to the insurance.
Yes, just before.
I walked past them last night.
I need to take a photo of it. I'm actually on Google site with it. Te Arapu Way. Is that the sort of example of sort of two-storey townhouse walk-up that the medium density?
That would be exactly the kind of things, except you've got an MDR. Now we're talking to a third story.
Yeah.
But as I was walking past those and looking at those, I was like, that's exactly what I was thinking and saying. It's like, this is what I can see as the type and form that will begin to change over time.
So when somebody says, what's this medium density residential zone going to give us? That's, we could say, we'll go
I
on
would
this
start pointing to those kind of examples.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking exactly the same as you're talking about.
Can we say how the sort of examples that you'd encourage your client to aim more?
I would. I seek good quality residential developments as part of my advice. I'm not sure whose those were, if any of that had been my orders.
It looks fairly recent, right?
It does look fairly recent, only in the last couple of years. But that was my one thought.
They look like two-bedroom dwellings. If anybody in the
smaller
course of this hearing can give us a little bit more detail about it,
My understanding Habitat for Humanity are involved with buildings. And another example of, if you haven't made your way down, if you go down to where New World is, and you go across there where the Urban Sports is, there's the development that Kerikeri-Waipapa has done, which is duplex as well. Another example of changes in the town.
Yeah, yes, I was walking down there this morning and I looked, I was like, oh, check that out. So that might be tomorrow's meeting. Yeah.
Urban development, which we'll go on to talk about the housing typologies, 3 stories versus 6 stories. You didn't touch on that, but I thought that's going to be a discussion point we're going to hear today. Did you want to comment on that in the context of Kerikeri, because it's not like, we're not Queen Street. We're not a tier 2, we're not Whangarei. Any comment on that in the context of Kerikeri?
I think my understanding is the medium density residential zone proposes the 3-storey. There have been the mixed use zone for Kerikeri now proposed to be replaced by the town centre zone for Kerikeri. The submission, as I understand, sought the 6 stories for that town centre zone, but the council's recommended PDR approach is a 4-storey. I think that is the right kind of staging of that change and transition of height for a tier 3. If you were looking at a town centre in a tier 2 or a tier 1 environment, I think you'd be trying to push for more height and more enablement in your town centre, generally because you often find you've got a better suite of services and facilities, a bigger centre footprint for a number of reasons that could be a need to go higher. I think for the change transition for the first time of the tier 3 environment in Kerikeri, bringing in that medium density and starting to enable a little bit more in the town centre, I think the 4-storey for the town centre, stepping to the 3-storey for the medium density, that then steps to the 2-storey for that remaining general residential around it is a good appropriate transition.
Just one very, very quick question. When you need an elevator, I've always thought it's up to 3-storey.
It's often been the 3 going to the 4th, and it's often been the why, and particularly in your bigger urban environments who've been dealing with medium density a lot more, people would rush in quickly to take up 3-storey enablement. They wouldn't really take a 4th-storey enablement, and then they would look for the next one to jump to the 6th, because that's when you're getting your money back on your lift and all that other.
Yeah, that's right. It adds a significant impact to cost per metre. Well, thank you very much for that further evidence. And
thank you.
Okay, we call Ms. Rennie, who's the urban design expert. She's going to kick off by briefly addressing Commissioner Kensington's question about the existing character of Kerikeri-Waipapa, and then she'll move to her summary.
Yes, so I have touched on character in relation to my kind of aura evidence. So there's some commentary in there in relation to.
That's regarding hearing 14, the urban zone.
Yes, so that so there is commentary in terms of town centre character and also in relation to residential character in the context of medium density. So there's some commentary there. There is also some commentary in the spatial plan itself. There's been some previous work done separately by council, a document called The Current State of Kerikeri-Waipapa, prepared by Common Ground, that touches on character and identity and the functionality of those urban areas. And I guess I would also note, I've commented a little bit in terms of my KFO evidence around character. But I'll note that an urban design framework is one of the actions out of the spatial plan, an acknowledgement that there is a deeper dive needed in the context of character and identity and broader kind of urban structure and framework for Kerikeri in particular, in the context of intensification, anticipated, and also in the context of how the bypass might work in the future. So I guess what I'm saying is it's a bit of a live issue. There is some work to be done that could transpire in a number of different ways, but there's an acknowledgement that the character of Kerikeri and Waipapa are different, and that is being driven largely by the historical development of those two settlements and the things that have influenced them in terms of natural features, waterways and the like, and their role in production in terms of, Waipapa being located on the state highway and serving a broader regional perspective in terms of industry, etc. So those aspects have influenced how they develop, the form of them and their character. But there is a little bit more work to do in terms of the built character aspects of Kerikeri in particular.
Thank you, that's useful because the existing character is going to change with intensification.
Yes.
With the one we've just been talking about down the road, it's
Yes.
quite different to what the rest of existing settlement is in Kerikeri.
Yes.
And I guess these promises that we're going to maintain the current identity of the place. But I guess what could go into the plan to help direct appropriate development, or are we having to rely on something that you're saying is going to happen in the future that's work in progress to really nail down what future development needs to do in order to integrate successfully into this existing character, which is different to other places, and a lot of it is to do with that existing natural patterns and landforms and big open properties with lots of space to plant trees, etc., and non-built elements. So I guess there's a bit of a tension.
Yes, there is.
How do you address that?
I'll just note further that in the spatial plan there is a couple of pages in the document. One at page 20, sorry, put my glasses on, page 28, which is what does urban change look like. So we've turned our minds to how the urban environment will change and is expected to change in terms of the NPSUD. So what that might look like and the challenges we might have there. So there's some examples there of how that might enable a mix of housing types, and it also looks to address what good practice looks like in terms of new greenfield growth areas. So I think we're starting to set the scene in the spatial plan as to how the urban environment is anticipated to change. And I guess the next aspect is managing effectively that change so that we achieve good outcomes. In my in my response to the Vision Kerikeri submission, I have made some further comments in relation to assessment matters and some fine-tuning of some of the provisions there, so that acknowledging that there's a little bit more to do there to ensure that we achieve achieve the outcomes that we're looking for.
Yes, we received quite a bit of evidence from Vision Kerikeri and part of Area 14,
Yes.
particularly on this question of change of character.
Yes.
Okay. So we should go back and have a look at that again in your response.
Yes, so there's a couple of recommendations that I've included in that.
Yes.
That look to strengthen some of the outcomes that we're looking for. I'll just now run you through quickly my summary statement. And I'll start at paragraph 2.2 in relation to urban form, character and connectivity, the KFO proposal. So I've set out in my evidence, it's my opinion that the proposed urbanisation of the KFO site will have several adverse urban design effects on the overall urban form of Kerikeri and Waipapa, the character and overall connectivity. Having reviewed the KFO urban design rebuttal evidence, my position remains unchanged. My key conclusions include loss of local character and identity. Kerikeri and Waipapa are spatially distinct urban areas with their own role, function and urban character. The KFO proposal risks undermining these differences by introducing a development that is not well integrated into either town. This would diminish the unique character, the valued qualities and the role and function of both towns.
So just to pause there, are you saying that the gap between them is important?
I am.
To reinforce the differences?
Yes, in some respects I am. So the setting of a town is important. It's not just character within the town, but context in which the town sits. So as I referenced earlier, a number of the natural features, the waterways, the rural context, etc., are part of the setting of these towns, and they assist with the overall urban the urban form and the legibility of the two settlements.
Thank you.
Compromised urban boundaries. The proposal would alter the current urban edges, weakening the existing defensible boundaries that help manage growth, likely leading to urban sprawl in the future. Inefficient urban growth. The proposal would not support a compact and efficient growth pattern, undermining the ability to achieve a compact and consolidated urban form for Kerikeri-Waipapa as envisaged by the spatial plan. Poor connectivity and integration. The proposal lacks meaningful integration with the existing urban areas and is constrained by physical barriers such as floodplains, topography, the golf course, and natural features. Access to Kerikeri is unconfirmed, with provision TPWS2 indicating that access for up to 1,600 dwellings will rely on State Highway 10 and Waitotara Drive. These constraints and the road layout indicated will limit accessibility and challenge the claim of achieving seamless connectivity through the proposed structure plan. Risk of isolated low-density development. Given the lack of integration and the physical constraints of the site, there is a risk that the development will become an isolated enclave or evolve into fragmented, low-density subdivisions and private car dependency. This outcome would further compromise the ability to deliver a compact, cohesive urban form as envisaged by the spatial plan and the PUP. Proposed district plan recommendations version option to provide development capacity. The spatial plan sets out a preferred approach for managing growth, and my evidence for hearing 14 addresses these approaches. As set out in the comments, it is my opinion that the spatial plan directs growth to occur within and immediately adjacent to the existing built environments of Kerikeri and Waipapa and away from rural areas. While changes to the PDP will help implement the intensification aspects of the spatial plan, further expansion to the south of Kerikeri and north of Waipapa should be considered through future planning processes. From an urban design perspective, this targeted growth strategy is preferable to the dispersed development proposed by KFO. Internal layout of the KFO proposal. As set out in my evidence, it's my opinion that the internal layout of the KFO proposal has not been fully or adequately tested, raising concerns about adverse urban design outcomes. There is no clear built form strategy to accommodate the 1,500 to 2,000 dwellings, suggesting a low density outcome and inefficient use of a currently rural zone land. The layout promotes private car dependency and does not adequately support multimodal transport options. A large mixed-use area risks creating a separate competing commercial node within the Waipapa Kerikeri context, rather than reinforcing existing centres. Policy evaluation. As set out in my evidence, it's my opinion that the KFO proposal does not give effect to the NPSUD due to concerns around car dependency, urban sprawl, and impacts on existing centres. It also fails to align with the Northland Regional Policy Statement, particularly regarding connectivity, housing diversity, and urban design principles. While there is some alignment with the PDP, the proposal lacks sufficient commitment to combat form, housing diversity, and infrastructure clarity. I consider that the proposed rezoning will not achieve a well-functioning urban environment, including a compact and consolidated urban form. In terms of the proposed plan provisions, the structure plan outlines a range of aspirations and design principles. However, as set out in my evidence, it is my opinion that these aspirations and principles are not translated into place-based urban design provisions or policies within the precinct chapter. There is little clarity on how the site's unique qualities and overall vision will be achieved through the proposed framework. There is no mandatory requirement to implement the comprehensive development plan, which significantly limits its effectiveness in securing quality urban design outcomes. Although a precinct plan is included and is derived from the structure plan, the rules do not require compliance with it, further weakening its influence. As a result, I do not consider the proposed consenting pathway provides sufficient certainty or a robust assessment framework, particularly given the lack of emphasis on urban design outcomes in the objectives and policies. This may lead to disjointed, ad hoc development. Additionally, I consider the precinct plan itself to have several shortcomings. I now respond to matters raised in the KFO rebuttal evidence of Mr. Neal. Lack of certainty. I disagree with Mr. Neal's assertion that the comprehensive development plan requirement as part of the precinct plan provisions in the associated plan will establish clear expectations for decision makers in relation to urban design. As outlined in my evidence, it is my opinion the precinct provisions lack a place-based framework, thereby falling short in relation to sound placemaking, a key consideration highlighted by Mr. Neal. In my view, they do not provide sufficient assurance of achieving good practice urban design outcomes. While the inclusion of an urban design assessment in the decision-making process is a positive step, it does not compensate for the fundamental shortcomings in the objectives, policies and matters of discretion. There remains no reference to the precinct plan. Mr. Neal has focused his consideration of urban design issues on in the CPD rule, and there are still inconsistent references to a precinct plan versus plan. The overall framework falls well short of addressing the key principles, particularly in relation to built form, density of development, layout, connectivity, and land use. I disagree with Mr. Neal's assertion that the urban design principles that I have considered in my analysis of the KFO proposal are more relevant to a larger metropolitan area. Good practice urban design principles and the concept of a well-functioning urban environment apply across a range of scales, including at the neighbourhood scale. In terms of loss of local character and erosion of town identity, Mr. Neal acknowledges that while the proposal will clearly alter the character of the currently largely rural land it is located on, it will not alter the character or qualities of the Kerikeri-Waipapa townships themselves. However, his assessment then shifts focus to potential future changes to built form within the existing urban environment, without adequately addressing the effects of urbanising the site on the broader setting of both towns. It is unclear why Mr. Neal does not consider the impact of the proposal on the town's roles, functions and their physical separation. In my view, the extent of change to the overall urban form of the area has been significantly understated. In response to Mr. Neal's criticism regarding the absence of an urban design framework for the medium density zone and the town centre zone, I note that these zones are situated within an already urbanised context, distinct from the rural land subject to potential future urbanisation. This existing urban environment inherently provides a baseline for development expectations, and I consider that the proposed town centre zone will assist with the urban hierarchy. As correctly identified, the introduction of an urban design framework and structure plan is recommended for both Kerikeri and Waipapa, as set out in the spatial plan, to guide future development in these areas. Furthermore, as outlined in my reply to the evidence of Vision Kerikeri, I have recommended that the relevant assessment matters be refined to further strengthen the ability to secure positive urban design outcomes. Importantly, I reiterate that a significant area of greenfield expansion identified in the spatial plan is intended to be addressed through a separate future plan change. This process allows for a more targeted and comprehensive consideration of urban design issues specific to those areas, including the nature of housing to address both diversity and choice within Kerikeri. I reiterate that the KFO proposal's lack of attention to the provision of housing choice makes it unsuitable to rezone for urban development through the PDP from an urban design perspective. In this context, it is both appropriate and necessary to distinguish between the planning responses required for established urban areas and those for future greenfield development. And lastly, in terms of compromised urban boundaries, I strongly refute Mr. Neal's assertion that the southern edges of the spatial plan greenfield area in Kerikeri lacks a strong and defendable boundary. In reality, on the ground, the boundary is clearly defined by existing landscape features and is further constrained by the presence of highly productive soils further to the south. These natural and environmental limitations make urban expansion beyond the spatial plan area both impractical and highly unlikely in the future. In contrast, the KFO structure plan diagram explicitly identifies areas for future urban expansion that extends into the wider rural landscape. This signals a clear intent to urbanise land that is currently rural, which raises concerns about the long-term integrity of the rural-urban interface. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Comprehensive, but also brief. I just have a couple of questions for you. If this were to proceed, does it need to connect to Kerikeri? I think that's option access C. If it were to, if this were to be known, is that an important? And if so, should it be a first connection, or I think as the submitter was suggesting, a later connection?
If this proposal was to proceed, I think there is an expectation that it be as well connected as possible to the existing urban environment of Kerikeri. So access C and B identify the opportunities to connect. And I think from an urban design perspective, I think both of those connections will be important. Whether the timing of those connections, I think, is related to, I guess, staging. So if the top half of the KFO site was to develop first, for example, then I think access point D is probably more important in the first instance. So if we've got a scenario of developing the top half first and bottom half second, then I think to enable that bottom area of land to develop, you need to have the access C, potentially, and then the access B over time. Having only one access point, I think, actually is not sufficient from an urban design perspective in terms of integration and connectivity.
And does there need to be connectivity across the floodway? And is what they've indicated enough?
Yes, access is required across the floodplain because otherwise you end up with two isolated pockets of residential land being accessed separately from either Kerikeri or Waipapa, but not being able to be connected internally. And the amenities that are suggested in the documentation are located across those two residential areas. So we have a local centre in the northern portion, and then we have a small mixed-use area and the large mixed-use area in the southern portion. So they contend that those amenities are available for this new community within the site, and so having access across the floodplain is critical for those members of this new neighbourhood to be able to connect to those amenities, including a school within the mixed use zone, albeit there is no certainty around the delivery of the school in that location. So connectivity is critical.
Thank you.
Mr. Rennie, at 2.4 of your evidence, or your summary statement, you say that in your opinion, the spatial plan directs growth to occur within and immediately adjacent to existing built environment. Are you suggesting that we're constrained in terms of our decisions on submissions to only allowing submissions that seek a rezoning immediately adjacent to existing built environment?
I think in the context of the KFO proposal, what I'm saying is that the spatial plan has identified land that is better suited for urban growth because it's immediately adjoining the existing urban environment, and that enables us to maximise the efficiency of existing infrastructure that's been within the town of Kerikeri. So we get the benefit of utilising and connecting into that existing infrastructure and adding to that new infrastructure. So development that sits beyond the existing urban areas, you have to work harder in terms of that ability to connect and I guess the infrastructure associated with it.
Yeah, I understand that. So that's largely seen in the context of the KFO land, but I agree with you. People have to work harder.
Yeah.
When it's beyond immediate.
Yes.
Thanks.
Yeah, I just had a couple. Thank you. Thank you for highlighting on the precinct, the proposed precinct plans, the arrows coming down into that land to the south of that proposed commercial mixed use area. I think when we go out and do our site visit, we need to have a close look at those neighbouring bits of land to see how, you know, how connected they are and whether that potential for future growth is realistic or not. And I guess I'm pleased that you highlighted it to us. Thank you. But my question was terminologies. We've got the comprehensive development plan, we've got a structure plan, we've got a precinct plan. Then we've also got off to the side the spatial plan that requires an urban design framework. There's all these plans and frameworks.
Yeah.
From an urban design perspective, are they all saying the same things, or and which ones should be more important than the others?
So I guess I think the precinct plan, which is the diagram, if we talk to it as the diagram, was previously referred to in the original submission, I think, as the structure plan, and that was accompanied by a written document which sets out the background to how this plan has come to be. So I think that was generally referred to as the structure plan.
So are they one and the same? The precinct plan?
Well, this is, I guess, this diagram is a summary of the written document that was referred to as the structure plan, is my understanding. And so I think where we're at now is that we've got this plan that's called a precinct plan, which is derived from the original structure planning document that KFO have prepared, which I have. So that document, which refers to it as the structure plan,
What
which
date?
sits, sorry?
What's the date on that?
21 October 2022. And so that was the overall written document and talks about how this plan has been created.
Right.
And included some of the options around the transport connections, etc., and how they've established, I guess, the vision and broad principles. So in my evidence I talked to, there's a lot of aspirations in here and a lot of principles. And when I say that they haven't been transferred into the framework, I'm referring to the area-specific matters or the precinct document, which will be included in the district plan. So there's a disconnect between that document and what is proposed within the plan. So I think in answer to closing out on the question, they're talking about it as this precinct plan, I think is where they've got to, but there is no reference in the plan provisions to the precinct plan with, I think, the exception of the 5 retail or commercial premises are provided to service the neighbourhood in the general location shown on the precinct plan. So my understanding of that is the purple area on the plan here, I think that's referring to that, but so a little bit unclear.
It's also referred to on one other policy, but I guess the key point is that it's consistently referred to in the provisions. It's a bit unfair.
So in answer to your question about a comprehensive development plan,
which you refer to.
that's to come in the future as part of the first resource consent application.
Right. Okay.
So they're going to, whether that's, it's a master plan or something along those lines, is to be submitted, and it needs to outline the following information is listed 1 through 10, and that comprehensive development plan needs to be considered against the matters of discretion.
Okay. That's really helpful. Thank you for setting that out. Yeah. Hopefully, when they present to us, we'll be able to ask them the same question. Okay. So they're on the same page. Yeah. Yeah, that's all.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for your answers to my questions.
Thank you. Can I ask a question? It was about urban design, but not for CAFO.
This is evidence about CAFO.
I had it about another site. Will you be there on Wednesday?
Yes, you can talk, you can ask questions.
I am here on Wednesday.
Wednesday.
Yes.
And we can do that at the end.
I am here through Wednesday.
It's about KFO. So
happy to answer questions in relation to Tombstone or...
You'll be here on Wednesday?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Rax is next, flooding expert.
Afternoon, Mr. Rex.
Afternoon, Chair.
Thank you. Sorry.
Got a statement, a summary statement that I was proposing to read out. I did also read the evidence of Mr. De Boer over the weekend. There was some extra items I thought I might comment on. Do you want me to comment on them separate to my summary statement, or just as they're appropriate in the statement?
I'll make your hands.
It's pretty obvious where the extra items are. So my evidence covers a review of the concept flood mitigation approach proposed by KFO. Okay, there was just a quick context. I thought it would be useful just to put up a picture of the floodplain. This is the second image. There's two. Is that the second one?
Yes, this is
Is this based on the Northland flooding models?
I was actually just checking to see at the bottom, but I can't quite read it. The first one is the Northern Regional Council one, and the second one is the one that's proposed by E2 Environmental. And one of my first comments is that I'm not, the floodplains aren't really in dispute. I'm happy to go with the E2 Environmental one, which is the second, which I think is that one.
This is page 2.
So the 197 hectare KFO site is located within the large Kerikeri River catchment. The contributing catchment area at that site is approximately 50 kilometres squared, and the flood modelling highlights that nearly 90 hectares of the site currently sits within the 1% AEP floodplain. 1% AEP floodplain flood extent is not disputed for purposes of the rezoning, and I consider the E2 Environmental model is suitable for the purpose of rezoning. I've included a copy of their 1% AEP floodplain in my summary statement I show on just the extra bit. But I know that at the time of writing, I've not read Mr. De Boer's 18th of September evidence, which refers to new modelling completed last month in September by water technology. But based on Mr. De Boer's comment that the 1 in 100 year 1% AEP, including climate change, flood extents are close to the previous version, there is nothing I would like to change in my evidence. Mr. Du Bois' comment that the ones that may be floodplain is similar to the March 1981 event is helpful for validating the floodplains that we're talking about. Their assessment of 2 times 100-year ARI was new information that I have not looked at. Mr. Cooter's evidence provides a useful summary and description of the baseline flooding across the site, notably that during the time of extreme flooding, the combined flow at State Highway 10 is forced to split, with a portion of the flow continuing down the Kerikeri River and a near equal portion flowing down an existing natural floodway that passes across the site. That's clear from the floodplains. The division of flows causes some areas on the KFO site to be surrounded by floodwaters, an island, most notable of which is the large area located on the northern side of the site, which becomes surrounded by the Kerikeri River floodplain to the north and east, and natural floodway to the south. Which, that area to the north that I'm talking about there. KFO's concept design approach was to reduce the natural water extent AUP floodplain climate change by 14 hectares across the site by restricting flood flows on both sides of the natural floodway, approximately 120 metres wide. We also propose a change on the true right bank of the Kerikeri River. The flood flows will be restricted by higher ground, so natural and man-made material, and KFO proposes to develop on non-flow land. Concept designs have inherent uncertainties due to the early stage nature of the design. That's really common across many civil-related projects. However, I consider that the proof of concept design for the floodway and the protections along the Kerikeri River lack the level of detail and information required to support rezoning, and there is little certainty of outcomes. While some decisions can be deferred until later consenting phases, I consider that changes to the flood mitigation design could materially impact information relied on to support the rezoning decision. I consider that more land could be required for flooding and flood mitigation than currently indicated, making less land available for development. The critical information gaps that should be addressed at the rezoning stage are confirmation on the use of stop banks, confirmation of the appropriate level of protection for the flood protection scheme, including consideration of residual effects, the downstream flooding effects on residential property, and an effects assessment on the wetland. I read Mr. Cooter's statement of rebuttal evidence. I do not consider it necessary to go through all the points by Mr. Cooter because they generally appear well aligned on matters requiring further consideration prior to resource consent. Our key point of difference relates to my view that some of the additional information on these matters should be available to support the rezoning decision and should not be deferred to resource consent stage. In my view, responding to the critical information gaps may materially change the information used to support the rezoning.
Yeah, I just at 3.2 here, I should talk about the key point of difference being respective views on additional information on that matter you've raised. And I mean, that seems to be a common theme with a number of people or a number of witnesses that are supporting vote. So in your view, those matters that you've listed A through D, they're particularly important for the rezoning decision because presumably if they're not found to be satisfactory, then that would work against any proposal for rezoning.
Correct, and I'm not sure how much the proposal relies on that 14 hectares of land being removed from the floodplain to develop on the validity of their scheme.
Yes.
I suspect that they won't get all that 14 hectares of land because it will be needed for stormwater management purposes or for flood mitigation purposes.
So that then leads into an economic question, I guess.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Just a quick one. You know, all the mitigation measures that they're wanting to put in place, quite extensive. Has that been done elsewhere in the district, to your knowledge? You know, on any other kind of things?
The mitigation that they're talking about doing in the future.
Yeah.
I think they're pretty standard. Yes, I'm not so sure about this particular district, but they're pretty standard across the country.
Yeah. And they're successful in other examples?
Yeah, they are.
So it's potentially feasible what they're proposing. At a conceptual level.
At a conceptual level, it is.
Yeah.
At this proof of concept level, we're seeing flood effects upstream and downstream. We're seeing this residual risk effect is something that concerns me. This land area to the north and making sure you've got access to that area concerns me. But yes, conceivably it does work.
Yeah. But you've got concerns, that's what you're saying, at this point in time?
Yeah, yes, I do. Yeah. When I sometimes sit and work on the developer side, and what I tend to try to do in these early stages of the project is make sure you've got the maximum land extent required for your stormwater management and your flood mitigation. That might reduce over time. I think where we've got this potential of increasing over time, that causes some concerns to me to the validity of the entire project.
Okay, that's good. Thank you.
Just one really quick question for you. In 2.8, B, I think it is, you talk about the level of protection.
Is that in my summary statement?
Yes, it's 2.8 of the summary statement, critical gaps, confirmation of the appropriate level of protection. As I've read the evidence, is it correct that the approach is to use the natural floodway as much as possible in the first instance, and then shore it up with the use of flood protection banks and what have you, if necessary? Is that your understanding? And is that where you're getting to?
Possibly, and it's not clear.
Yeah.
So when this the level of protection that we're talking about, there's an underlying assumption that a 100-year level of protection is sufficient. I'm questioning.
Oh, that's that. So that's the how reliant can we be on the 100-year flood now?
That's right. But I acknowledge that Mr. Cooter has also done some extra work to look at what the consequences of additional flows would look like, and indicated that maybe a meter's extra depth could be needed.
Right.
Whether that can be dredged out, recessed from the floodway, or whether that means they're going to have banks on the side, it's not clear yet. The ability to excavate more material because of bedrock, it's not clear. I am nervous about the use of stop banks as a flood protection scheme because of the inherent risk associated with structural failures or overtopping, and the greater risk which those on the downstream side of it could be exposed to.
Yeah. I'm going to ask those sorts of questions to Northland Regional Council engineer. But do you believe that it seemed to me that prior to climate change being a thing, and I don't think anyone denies it here, we could rely on the 1 in 100-year flood as being a fairly reliable measure. Since climate change, is it more dynamic, more uncertain? So 1 in 100-year flood.
Is there more uncertainty?
Yeah.
The way in which the 100-year flood flows are calculated hasn't changed. The way in which we project them moving forwards and the influence of climate change, we're having to factor in more uncertainty.
Yeah.
As well. With the increased extreme events that we're seeing, some of the the approaches by which you do your statistics historically they are being questioned at the moment.
Okay.
Typically, you could historically be able to rely on an individual rainfall gauge to give you an indication as to what the rainfall might be like. But because of the isolated nature of some of the rainfall we see, particularly around the country, some of those rain gauges have proved unreliable to do that. So that's why some of the historic ways of doing things are under question.
Okay, thank you. Okay, no further questions. So
we're moving online.
The last two?
Yeah, we've got the last two. We're moving online, and we've got
very well, folks. I'm really pleased with how things are progressing.
Ms. Andrews, the ecology expert.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, good morning. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Well, thank you. And yes, so we're in your hands to go through your summary statement. Thank you.
Cool. I will take the introduction as read to save time. So the site comprises a mix of pasture, cropping and freshwater habitats, including streams and wetlands associated with the Kerikeri and Puketotira stream that are buffered by mature indigenous forest. So the proposal includes changing from rural to live urban zoning across the site, with specific precinct provisions that require the development of a floodway structure to manage flood hazards. And the floodway has been placed within the existing flow path and is required to facilitate the urban development across most of the site. So the ecological assessment methodology. So the ecology report and evidence by Ms. Barnett provides high-level assessments, and some information has not been fully assessed, including the mapping and delineation of freshwater habitats across the site, targeted fauna surveys, in particular for bats and mudfish, and an assessment of areas mapped as significant by the Department of Conservation. So a field-based definitive assessment, including delineation of all freshwater features, targeted fauna surveys and assessment of significant areas would provide better context for understanding the proposal and its associated effects, particularly around the proposed floodway location and the forested gully. Due to the lack of detailed design, high-level assessments can only be based on assumptions. If these assumptions are incorrect, the development of the site as an urban area may ultimately result in residual adverse effects on biodiversity, such as improper riparian or bat corridor setbacks and improper management of lighting and noise. So effects management, section 2.6. As discussed, a number of uncertainties remain regarding the ecological values of the site and therefore the associated effects of the proposal. The effects that are still poorly understood include effects on bats from roost tree removal, increased lighting, effects on fauna, including mudfish if they are present, and effects associated with the proposed floodway on streams and wetlands and the downstream receiving environment. So for a greenway proposal of this scale and to enable proper assessment of the KFO proposal, I consider that a full list of the proposed provisions relating to ecology, for example, riparian setbacks and vegetation removal thresholds, should have been provided along with a more detailed assessment of the potential effects, which may require more detailed on-site surveys and appropriate management measures. This would require a better understanding of the ecological features on site as set out above. So in summary, if assumptions about values of site are incorrect, the proposed rezoning may ultimately result in significant residual adverse effects on biodiversity. So I have read the rebuttal evidence. I provide a quick response to some of the matters addressed in Ms. Barnett's rebuttal evidence. So some of the ecological effects described in the rebuttal evidence can adequately be addressed at resource consent stage, including the potential effects on lizards can be managed through site surveys and the preparation of management plans at resource consent stage. This approach is appropriate as habitats can change over time, as detailed by Ms. Barnett. Additional controls should be provided under the zoning provisions for non-protected vegetation that may provide lizards, which is also recommended in Ms. Barnett's evidence. And avoidance of remnant habitats along the Kerikeri River can mostly be achieved through the provision of Esplanade reserves at resource consent stage. However, as mentioned in the report, so that's actually a mistake, it's by Bioresearchers, not Ecology NZ, sorry. The Esplanade Reserve width should be increased in places to encompass all riparian vegetation, and the zone change should include provisions to reflect this, which I think is consistent with Ms. Barnett's evidence as well. My view is that further consideration should be given to the following. The increase of pests and predators, including pets, as the site borders a sensitive ecological environment, effects of lighting and roost tree removal on bats, and effects of the construction of the floodway on streams and wetland habitats. While generally the loss of bat habitat and direct effects on bats can be addressed at resource consent stage, large standalone trees, particularly exotic trees that may provide roosting habitat, do not have protections under the plan and may be removed without consent. Ideally, KFO would incorporate specific precinct provisions requiring any resource consent application on site to consider if removal of trees over 15 centimetres DBH is required, and if so, to implement best practice bat roost tree removal protocols. In addition, as there is a lack of surveys of bats in the local area, it is not known whether or not Indigenous bats use the site or the forested gully as a corridor. Formal surveys and assessments would guide the requirements for setbacks of urban development and lighting and specific lighting controls. These types of controls should be incorporated into the specific precinct provisions. This approach has been implemented in other rezoning plan changes, such as the Peacock Structure Plan in Hamilton. While high-level assessment of effects associated with urban development is generally sufficient at this stage of the rezoning, this does not extend the proposed floodway. As the proposed floodway will be required to facilitate development across most of the site, a detailed ecological impact assessment should be provided prior to approving the rezoning. This will be required to fully understand if the rezoning at the site is practical and appropriate. As wetlands and streams have not been fully mapped and described within the floodway footprint, it is not possible to fully understand the potential losses of those habitats that may result from its construction. The National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management requires offsetting of values and extent of natural wetland. Therefore, creation of wetlands may need to be incorporated into the floodway design. My view remains that the provision of a full ecological impact assessment before the land is rezoned would help to ensure that there are appropriate opportunities for mitigation and offsetting and provide confidence that the ecological impacts can be appropriately managed. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Very concise and detailed summary. Commissioner Kensington, any questions?
Thanks, Ms. Andrews. Just one question from me. In summary, are you basically saying that the bioresearcher's assessment that's been provided with the submission is not comprehensive enough? I mean, it's given us some information, but are you saying it needs to be more detailed? Is that right?
Yeah. So they've mapped some wetlands and streams across the site, but have admitted that some areas were only mapped via desktop, and that there is potential that unidentified wetland habitats occur within the flow path of where the floodway exists. Well, it was proposed. And so, yeah, without fully knowing the extent of habitats in those areas, we can't fully understand the level of potential effects.
Okay, thank you. And then the second part of it is, out of that assessment, you'd want some recommendations to inform the plan provisions about future states of things like wetland restoration, all that sort of stuff, to be explicit in plan provisions.
Yeah, so I guess incorporating specific provisions in the rezoning precinct rules requires a robust assessment framework that ensures effects are managed appropriately at resource consent stage. And yes, some effects such as lighting on bats and lighting setbacks from riparian corridors are better incorporated into the rezone precinct provisions, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. Thank you.
And no questions from me, so thank you very much.
Thank you. And last but not least, we have Dr. Hill.
Dr. Hill's online too,
He's
okay?
online.
Kia ora. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, you're a little bit blurry, but I suspect it might sharpen up as your video renders, but we can hear you clearly and we know what you look like, so happy to see it.
I can turn the camera off. Right. I'm going to provide, I've read through my summary of evidence, which includes an initial response to the rebuttal evidence by Mr. Hunt for KFO as well. My evidence focuses on the KFO site soils, land use capability, and the related productive capacity. Specifically, I've looked at the reports by Hanmore Land Management and the Ag First NPS HPL report and Mr. Hunt's evidence. So in terms of the site description, the topography is largely flat, but includes steep vegetated slopes towards Kerikeri River. A significant portion of the land is low-lying and subject to flood hazard. The soils are a mixture of old basalt, volcanic and terrace soils, with the majority classified as LUC or Land Use Capability Class 3. In terms of highly productive land status, under the transitional definition of highly productive land in the NPS HPL, 163 hectares of the KFO site are classified as highly productive land. This accounts for around just under 82% of the total site area. A land use capability survey was undertaken by HLM, which Hanmore Land Management. The survey which was provided with KFO submission provides more detailed finer scale LUC mapping and of the KFO site, and KFO has relied on this to determine the site's productive capacity. While HML noted that further detailed soil mapping would be required to identify soil boundaries and exact areas of each LUC unit, I noted in Mr. Hunt's evidence that he described this the survey as the HML soil and LUC assessment. I consider the HML survey, this initial one, to be only a preliminary survey, and as such, the lack of detail creates some uncertainty regarding the estimated areas of highly versatile soils and the soil types, and also the land limitations on the site. And based on the HML survey, 86 hectares, or around 34% of the KFO site, is highly versatile soil. 36 hectares of which is a mix of both highly versatile and not highly versatile soil. The remainder, 98 hectares, is not highly versatile soil. In terms of rural productivity, based on the soil and land characteristics alone, I maintain that the KFO site, particularly its LUC Class 3S2 land, holds at least some potential for horticulture. LUC 3S2 land is considered potentially suitable for a wide range of crops, including horticulture, and the land parcels with this LUC unit commonly support intensive horticulture elsewhere in the district. While the KFO site is currently used for dairy grazing and for beef finishing, it previously was used for dairy farming. Mr. Hunt notes that reinstating dairy farming would require significant capital expenditure as the existing infrastructure is derelict. This suggests that the main reason for not considering dairy land use is the lack of compliant infrastructure and not so much the soil's inherent limitations. Comparison with alternative sites. Mr. Hunt's comparative analysis of alternative sites is, in my opinion, flawed due to inconsistencies with data granularity. The KFO site was assessed using a more detailed site-specific LUC survey, while the alternative sites were evaluated using broader NZLRI data and general desktop observations. More recent SMAP data, which was not included in the AgFirst report, indicates that the southeastern site is dominated by ultic soils, which are unsuitable for horticulture. Given this, it is difficult to conclude that the KFO site has a relatively lower productive capacity than the southeastern site. Effects on the district's overall productive capacity. In my opinion, the conversion of the KFO site to urban use, despite being a small proportion of the district's highly productive land, would have cumulative effects due to irreversible loss of productive soils. The proposed rezoning of the site would result in the loss of 163 hectares of highly productive land as defined under the NPS HPL transitional provisions, and the loss of 89 hectares of land with at least some potential for horticultural production. I'm moving on to the my comments on the rebuttal evidence provided by Mr. Hunt. Mr. Hunt has included in his rebuttal evidence in Appendix A a report by HLM that undertakes a new and more detailed soil and LUC assessment of the site. And I refer to this as a revised HML report. The revised HML report was undertaken on the 18th of September 2025 following the preparation of my evidence. The revised HML report provides a more detailed assessment of the soils and the LUC units for the site and overcomes the shortcomings of the preliminary assessment they provided and relied upon by Mr. Hunt in his statement of evidence dated 16 June. Mr. Hunt has not relied on the revised HML report for reclassifying highly productive land under the NPS, but rather to help determine the productive capacity of the site. I have therefore taken statements in paragraph 33 of Mr. Hunt's rebuttal evidence and section 5.2 of the revised HML report that the site contains 73% highly productive land as being imprecisely expressed. As I set out in paragraph 5.4 of my statement of evidence, approximately 81% or 81.9% of the site is highly productive land under the transitional definition of the NPS HPL. I agree that the revised HML report may be suitable for determining productive capacity of the site, but not reclassifying the soils as highly productive land. Based on the more accurate, finer scale soil and LUC information provided, the revised HML report identifies 104.4 hectares of the site as LUC 3S2, compared with the 86 hectares in the preliminary survey. As stated in my evidence, LUC 3S2 land is considered potentially suitable for a wide range of crops, including horticulture. The LUC 3S2 area comprises a mix of 4 soils, with drainage ranging from poorly drained through imperfectly drained to well drained. Based on this new soil and LUC information, the soils in parts of the mapped 3S2 area are variable with moderate limitations for horticulture, and in my opinion, the areas with poor drainage are unlikely to be suitable for horticulture. For the LUC 3S2 areas with well-drained Whangarei and Okaiho soils, the limitations are manageable with respect to horticulture, and this has been demonstrated elsewhere in the district. Based on the soil characteristics alone, my view is that these areas hold some potential for horticultural use, as is supported in section 5.2 of the revised HML report, provided that irrigation is available. Finally, Mr. Hunt indicates in his rebuttal evidence that irrigation is not available for KFO site. And if this is so, then I would agree that based on the soil characteristics alone, that the LUC 3S2 area would not be viable for horticulture. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hill. You've used a phrase, which I just wouldn't mind you clarifying, where you say suitable for a wide range of crops. including horticulture. So that suggests that there are crops that aren't horticulture that you can grow. And I didn't know what that meant.
Yeah, yes, I guess that's really the more versatile a soil is, the more the range of uses you can use for it. So it actually, in terms of crops, I probably include the likes of pasture, forage crops, root crops for harvesting for feed, etc.
Oh, okay. So horticulture means for human consumption.
Yes, I'd say horticulture is by horticulture I'm including vegetable production and orchard type. Yeah.
Right. And your last statement seems to have to be quite significant. That is, its viability is reliant on its ability to be irrigated, correct?
Yes, in terms of other areas, other parts of the district, it seems that the intensive horticulture relies on irrigation. I'm not aware. I don't have any understanding about the access of irrigation to that land. So I am just restating the statements made by Mr. Hunt in his evidence that he has looked into that, and his, based on the information he was provided, that irrigation isn't available for that site.
Okay, well, we might explore that with Mr. Hunt tomorrow.
Okay.
No, there's just quite a lot of discussion in your evidence about LUC 3 and, you know, whether it's included, whether it's excluded or the like. But if you took LUC class 3 out altogether, then, I mean, I know you're not an expert on viability issues and the like, but presumably that would make the site potentially more viable than otherwise.
Sorry, could you just repeat that? Sorry, Commissioner.
There's quite a lot of debate in your evidence about land classification unit 3. That has to be included in terms of the unsuitability of the site for any greater use. But what if you took that out? There's enough information there suggested to be, that it could be taken out. Does that change your views on things?
In terms of removing the LUC 3S2 horticultural capable land, if it wasn't irrigated, is that what you mean? Yes, because there is quite a large proportion, 81% is LUC class 3 land, but the other class 3 land is limited by wetness, poor drainage to imperfect drainage, and so if the 3S2 land wasn't viable for horticulture, that would make some difference. Yes. However, having said that, the terms of just for horticulture, but also considering intensive pastoral land use, the combination of those LUC3 units across the site would still allow for intensive pastoral use. You would have to consider seasonal management. For example, the wetter areas would be more productive in summer, dry times when the water table's not as high. And conversely, the LUC3S land would be more productive in the wetter times, in the winters, for example, when it has better drainage and less water on it.
Thanks.
I think I got that right. I may have got that back to front.
Great, thank you very much, Dr. Hill. You will be available later on in the hearing to answer any other questions related to other land?
Yeah, on Wednesday. Yes, I will be. Yes, I will be.
Thank you. Okay, I think we're here.
Thank you. That's the section 42A presentation, and we conclude that and go off to lunch unless there are any final questions.
Does anybody else have anything else to raise? I think what I'd like to do is it's 2:20 and we're going to start again at 3. I think we need a good break. So I think we'll make it 3:10 past 3. We'll let the other submitters in. So we're adjourned till then.
Okay. I will stop recording.